away from them. "Oh, what's the matter, Sharky? Give up? Going for easier prey?" Carly followed the shark's trajectory with her eyes. "Yes, actually." Rennie turned the chopper for a better look. Oh, great. A few 100 feet in its path was a small sailing yacht. There was no time to warn them. The Megalodon sped toward the boat as though it held a personal grudge. From afar, they watched pieces of the boat fly in opposite directions. The Megalodon passed through it, doubling back to munch on the stranded couple huddled on the flybridge. Both officers felt their hearts sink with the wreckage. This fish was truly evil. It was as though it took genuine pleasure in wreaking havoc on anything weaker than itself. It couldn't seem to get enough either. Already it was darting further north. Rennie followed the fish for a few 100 yards, then realized it was moving in on a fishing striker. The man on board had something on the line. The rod was bent and the line taut. The fisherman was too wrapped up in the moment to realize the 7-foot dorsal fin closing in on him. Pushing the chopper to its maximum speed of 200 miles per hour, Rennie hovered the chopper over the deck. The fisherman looked up, his cap swept from his brow by the draft. "Hey, what's the deal?" he shouted. "Sir, you're in danger. We're sending a ladder down to you," Rennie said through the speaker. "What? Danger? I'm fine. Go away. Can't you see I'm in the middle of something?" Carly threw the ladder down. The man brushed it away. "What's with this harassment?" "It's not harassment. There's a shark coming right for you, dude. It's already killed several people," Carly shouted. She pointed a finger to the southwest. The man looked. There was nothing there. "You guys are crazy. I have a marlin on the line. First one in 10 years. I'm not letting you screw this up." "Whoa!" The pole was nearly yanked from his grasp, the rod threatening to snap. Several tense jolts followed, then the line went slack. The man reeled it in and found that the wire had broken. He looked up at the chopper. "You assholes! See what you did?" "For the love of God, man, climb the damn ladder," Rennie said. "Are you cops so bored that you feel the need to prank people?" He threw his rod on the deck. "You think I'm so stupid to believe that there's a giant shark coming at me?" A fountain of ocean sprayed the deck. The man looked in awe as the Megalodon appeared alongside the stern. In its jaws was his marlin, its bill sticking out of the left side of its mouth like a cigarette. The shark raised its head high, not wanting to lose its human prey even while its jaws were occupied with the billfish. With a swing of its head, the shark smacked the boat. In doing so, the marlin's bill, still protruding from the side of its mouth, skewered the fisherman. Like a sausage embedded on a toothpick, he was lifted off the deck. He dangled along the side of the Meg's jaws before finally it swallowed him and his prized marlin. For good measure, the Megalodon struck the boat once more, caving in the starboard side. Water rushed into the breach and finished the job. Now, the shark was heading west. Rennie followed its trajectory. "Chief, it's heading for North Beach. It's gone nuts. Going after anything on the water." "Chief, do you copy?" After checking over his officers, one of which had taken a hit to the head during the assault, Nico yanked his radio from his belt. "I copy. Patrols, how's the evacuation going?" "There's still people in the water, Chief," one of the shore patrols said. "We're doing the best we can, but there's only a handful of us, and a lot of these people are pretty far out. We can't get word to them." "Damn it to hell," Nico said. He looked to Denise, who stood on the flybridge. "Take us north." "You got it. Dispatch, what's the ETA on the Coast Guard?" "Chopper's on approach on max speed," Susie replied. "Should arrive any minute. Cutter's been updated on the situation. Its commanding officer is being flown in for a briefing." "Very comforting," Nico muttered. Despite the police presence, North Beach was as packed as it always was. Several people went all the way out to the shark nets. Beyond them were people on rubber rafts, small sailboats, paddle boats, and parasailers. Many of those in the shallows responded to the officers' demands to vacate the water, while those further out failed to comply. Even with the use of bullhorns, many remained a couple 100 feet out. When Rennie and Carly arrived, they went right to work on alerting all of the vessels in the immediate area. The first two, both sailboats, complied without offering resistance. They moved for the docks on the northeast shore. The next vessel they approached was a yacht hauling a parasailer. Despite a police chopper in front of them and the echo of the microphone, they continued to go about their activities as though nothing was wrong. "You'd think these people would get the hint," Rennie said. He approached the yacht, saw a pair of guys standing near the helm with beers in their hands. Not even 11 in the morning and they were already started on the suds. The sight of alcohol and the lack of urgency at a police chopper in front of them made it clear this was not going to be a simple venture. Still, he had to try. "I need you guys to dock your boat at once. There's an immediate threat in the water." One of the guys raised his beer as though to toast the officers. He pointed to the open fuselage door. "Hey, babe, you're smoking hot for a police chick." Any other time, Carly would have been flattered, even despite the fact that the compliment came from a drunken idiot. This time, she didn't even take in the words. Her eyes were on the east. The fish was moving in fast. Its dorsal fin emerged first. Then, 40 feet ahead of it, the snout appeared. The eyes were rolling back, the lips parting to reveal red gums lined with white teeth. The woman on the parasail saw the fish and screamed. When the two dudes finally looked, they descended into simultaneous panic. The shark was 50 feet out and lifting its head to bite a chunk out of the boat. One of them grabbed the throttle and shifted it to full speed. Their boat sped underneath the chopper, the wind draft causing the parasail to drop closer to the water and right into the path of the shark. Like a bird snapping a bug out of midair, the fish plucked the woman and dove, taking the cord with it. The two guys felt the quick jolt reverberate through the deck as the cord snapped. When they looked behind them, the woman and the parasail were gone. Moments later, bits of red fabric floated to the surface, each one arriving closer to the fast-moving boat. Rennie followed them, watching the shape slowly closing in. He wished he had a grenade or a depth charge to drop on the damn thing. A bazooka would definitely come in handy. Hell, he'd take a cherry bomb at this point. Anything as long as it got the shark's attention off the civilians. They were idiots, sure, but they didn't deserve this. Bits of nylon broke away from its jaws as the teeth shredded the parachute. By the time the fish reached the boat, the only bits left were those caught in its teeth. A single impact toppled the boat end over end. Both men were in the water now, landing within 10 feet of each other. The shark closed in on one, snatched him in his jaws, then whipped its tail as it darted away. Its caudal fin struck the other with the force of a monorail. As opposed to the officer who was launched out of the water, this victim simply exploded on impact. Limbs and guts drifted apart in the cloud of blood. Finally, the fish moved in toward the abundance of vibration coming from the shallower areas. Carly emptied her final 5 rounds into the creature's back as it closed in on the nets. Now, the people who had ignored the police instructions understood the cause for alarm. The Megalodon started by going after the small boats outside the nets. It attacked with such precision that it almost appeared systematic. It grabbed a sailboat in its jaws and crunched it like a pretzel, sending wood and limbs sprinkling to the water like crumbs. Rubber rafts and the people they carried popped effortlessly between its teeth. Dinghies snapped like toothpicks. Emboldened by the sense of superiority, the Megalodon moved in for the nets. For the second time in 24 hours, they failed to prevent an outside force from entering the swim zone. It took little effort for the Megalodon to shred a wide enough hole in the material for its body to pass through. For 1,000 square feet of space, there was not a single inch of still water. Between the hyper-violent movements by the shark and those of the hundreds trying to flee, the water looked as though it was boiling. It took in mouthfuls at a time. The shark didn't even have to focus on any individual target. It simply moved in toward a group, opened its mouth, and when it closed its jaw, there were writhing victims between its teeth. The smacking of its caudal fin sent others hurtling through the air like meteors. Some splattered on the beach like upside-down pizzas, while others simply landed in impossible, inhuman shapes. The officers on the beach did their best to shoot the fish, but with the abundance of panicking people, even a target as large as the Meg was difficult to hit. Not that it mattered anyway. The few shots that found their way to its flesh simply skidded off. Such puny weapons weren't going to drive the creature away. The Meg had literally found a buffet. The only thing that could stop its massacre was the presence of a true challenger. The Megalodon halted, its lateral line detecting movement from a large object approaching from the east. The object was roughly the same size as itself and moving toward the shallows. There was a smell of diesel that only the man-made things above produced. This incoming craft wasn't just any boat. It was the one that had rammed it earlier. Being the master of this territory, the Megalodon could not let any challenge go unanswered. It plowed through the net a second time on its way out, then darted for its enemy. "Where's it going? Oh, shit!" Rennie saw the manta ray speeding from the southeast. "Chief, it's coming right at you." "I know. We gotta get it away from the beach. You guys focus on getting any stragglers out of the water." "What about you, Chief?" Carly said. "Don't worry about us." "Damn you, Nico," Carly said. How many more cops had to be sacrificed today? The sound of the boat horn did the trick. Denise sounded it off a second time while watching the distant fin draw nearer. Now that she had successfully driven the shark away from the beach, the tight sensation in her stomach set in. What have I done? It was a thought based solely on self-preservation. She reminded herself that she could have docked the boat and stayed inland if she wanted to. Outside, one of the officers from Boat 6 was standing ready with his Glock. The other was below, barely conscious after hitting his head. Nico stood ready with his rifle. "Cameron, where are you?" Right then, he arrived in the pilot house. In his hand was the tranquilizer gun in a case with the cyanide. "Got the stuff you asked me to get." She took it from him and went outside. "Take the wheel." She joined her ex-husband down on the main deck and started loading the dart with the cyanide. "I hope this plane of yours works," Nico said. "Well, if you didn't, I'd be questioning why you brought us over here," she said. "Fair enough. I see you still enjoy your fair share of sarcasm. I was married to you for nearly a decade. Sarcasm was how I survived," she said. "Lovely," Nico said. He watched as the swells grew larger as the shark cut along the surface. "Hey. Yeah? Tell you what, if we survive this, maybe we'll have that talk." "Really?" she said. "Yes, really." He looked at the tranquilizer dart. "Then again, with that little needle, it's not looking good for us, is it?" Denise looked at the dart. The needle was 3 inches long, suitable for most creatures including whales, but whales weren't also bulletproof, unlike this shark. "The only way for this to work is to get a dart in its mouth." "Yeah, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the only time that thing opens its mouth is to chomp down on somebody," Nico said. He shrugged and took the rifle from her. "Well, we didn't come this way for nothing. Come on, fishy." Just a couple 100 feet to go, 5 seconds to impact. He kept the scope on the bastard's nose, hoping it'd rise out of the water and expose that toothy smile. "Look," the officer called out. His voice was drowned out by the sound of twin T-700 GE-401C gas turbine engines. Like an angel sent from heaven, the HH-60J Jayhawk flew in from the north and hovered a few 100 feet to the east. The fuselage door was open. Inside, one of the crew was taking aim with the Barrett M82 anti-material precision rifle. Unlike anything the police force carried, the 50 caliber rounds fired from that weapon managed to get the Meg's attention. 2 rounds struck near its left pectoral fin, drawing blood. The fish jerked to its right and sped past the stern of the manta ray. The chopper continued pursuit, the gunman firing several more shots at the fish. "This is CG-4 calling the Cielo Nublado Police Department. This is the chief. Thanks for the save." "No problem, sir. I'd recommend you dock that boat right away. We've lost visual of the fish. I suspect it went deep. Unfortunately, we don't have a way of tracking it." "Copy that." Nico lowered his radio. "Damn. If only we managed to get the tag on the thing." Denise put a hand on his arm. "At least we'll live to fight another day." She looked up at the pilot house. "Cameron, take us in, will you?" "No argument there," he replied. Nico watched the chaos ensue on the beach as emergency personnel attempted to assist the many injured. Panicked civilians ran amongst them, many searching for loved ones throughout the chaos. He imagined Rob the mayor having a heart attack. Tourism on this island would be dead for the next several years at least. North Beach would forever be known as Blood Beach. And despite the heavy sacrifices, the police department would still probably receive the brunt of the blame. Because that's how people seem to operate in today's society. One thing was for certain, this island would never be the same again. Chapter 26. The engine sputtered. It was leaking oil into the water below thanks to the bullet holes placed by the police officer the thugs had sacrificed to the shark. To make matters worse, they were noticing increased air traffic. News media was flying to the island in droves. They hadn't stuck around to witness it, but it was clear that things went from bad to worse with the giant shark. Chris turned the boat northward, then watched the island to his right. "We need to get out of here," Alan said. "Yeah, no shit. Let's head back to Pedro's house and grab our money," Thatcher said. "If we leave, we might as well blow our own brains out," Chris said. "Enrique's boat is about to die. We need to head inland." "All right, sure," Thatcher said, "because it's not like the entire world doesn't know we were hiding out on this island by now." "He's right," Alan said. "They're probably looking for us. They know we were hiding out in Pedro's house, so we can't go back there." "Wait," Thatcher waved a finger, his face ghostly white, including his eyes. "We have to go back to his place. The rest of our cash is stashed there." "Yeah, sure, because the cops aren't investigating that as we speak," Chris said. "They're busy with the shark," Thatcher said. "If you don't think they have at least one patrol unit checking out Pedro's residence, then the drugs truly have fried your neurons, friend," Chris said. "Don't forget we're still some of the most wanted men in the East Coast right now. A giant shark doesn't change that. Plus, we can guarantee neighboring police departments are sending aid to Cielo Nublado as we speak," Alan said. Thatcher shook his head. No. We can't come out of this empty-handed. We just can't. If you weren't such a junkie and insisted on making a deal with Roberto, then we wouldn't be in this mess," Chris said. "Oh yeah? If you didn't shoot those people in the parking lot, the cops wouldn't have been alerted so quickly," Thatcher said. "And we wouldn't have been identified." "Are we seriously doing this dance again?" Alan said. "Guys, we need to figure out what to do. I mean right this moment. In case you haven't noticed, we're sticking out like a sore thumb right now." Chris leaned forward and placed his forehead on the dashboard, mimicking the motion of bashing his own skull in. He was somewhat tempted to. What Alan said was correct. The odds were not in their favor. Then add the stress of their stolen loot no longer being in their possession, meaning everything they'd endured had been for nothing. "Okay, let's look at this with level heads. We can't stay adrift, and we can't flee. This boat's not gonna last. We're lucky we've made it this far. Our only chance is to go back." Thatcher crossed his arms. "Might as well stick our heads in a hornet's nest." "Chill out. At the moment, I'm certain they're distracted with the shark phenomenon." "Yeah. Is nobody going to mention that?" Alan said. "Holy shit, that freaking shark! It was as big as it—" "Dude, didn't you just say we need to figure out a solution? Now all of a sudden you want to go on about mutant sharks?" Alan stepped back. "Right. Anyway," Chris said, "if we go back now, we can blend in. We just need to stay away from police presence, and the media presence if we can help it." "Where do we stay? We can't just be wandering the streets all night," Thatcher said. For once, the druggie had a point. Chris pondered all the options. Hotels were a no-go. Returning to Pedro's house was suicide. They didn't know anybody else. They couldn't hang around outdoors, considering an increased police and military presence would guarantee they'd be spotted. The only viable option would be to use force to obtain a hideout. Considering how things had gone thus far, such an action would almost guarantee more collateral damage. To make matters worse, it wasn't as simple as kicking in a door and forcing the homeowner to let them stay. They needed to know something about the home they'd be invading. How many residents were there? Did they own firearms? Were they expecting anyone to be coming over, such as a spouse that worked late? Worse, would that place be related to anyone in the police department? That'd be unlikely, but then again, unlikely apparently was their thing recently. It had gone to the max today with the unlikely appearance of a giant shark. "There's only one viable option I can think of at the top of my head," Chris said. "That boat leading the police charge. That wasn't a police boat." "Yeah, so what?" Thatcher said. "The cops were still using it." "You remember what Pedro said? He'd heard from the news that the police chief was teaming up with a researcher to investigate some recent accidents. That boat was the research vessel he was using." Thatcher shrugged. "Your point?" "That researcher, to my knowledge, isn't from here. If we can overtake that boat, we can use it to slip away. You saw as well as I there was only a couple of people on it. We can overtake it." "I'm starting to feel like a pirate," Thatcher said. "The Coast Guard won't search that vessel. The only thing we might have to worry about is the chief himself stopping by for a visit." "Then we'll plan for that," Chris said. Thatcher rubbed his bristly chin. "You know, you might be onto something, Chris. If the scientist on that boat is a marine biologist, they might know how to dive." "Yeah, possibly." Chris wasn't sure he liked where this was going. "Maybe with a little incentive, we can put that fella to use. We know where the plane went down. More importantly, its cargo." Chris nearly face-palmed his forehead. You seriously want to go after the sunken drugs and money? Thatcher shrugged. You yourself said that recovering the money at Pedro's house was suicide. Right now we're flat broken on the run. We get the money we paid Roberto as well as the cocaine. We can make do just fine for a while. Alan raised a hand. I'm with Thatcher on this one. Thatcher hit him with an intimidating stare. On this one? When were you not with me? You know what I mean, Alan said. He turned to face Chris, deliberately avoiding Thatcher's piercing gaze. He is right, though. We need that money. It's $1.3 million. Might only be a third of what we hauled from the bank, but it's better than nothing. Chris thought about the long term. In order to hide, they'd have to travel to a different state, preferably on the other side of the country. Such an endeavor would be impossible without funds. I suppose you're right. Good. Thatcher checked the ammo in his pistol magazine. Any thoughts on where that lady's boat is docked? Dunno. We'll have to check the piers. Chris checked his watch. If we're going to follow this course of action, we need to start now, while the cops are occupied. Let's dock this boat somewhere and hope nobody notices until we're gone. Chapter 27. Usually, when Nico felt this physically exhausted, he was many days into a dreary investigation that involved piecing together many details. Today, it only took a few hours. Shortly after the attack, a second Coast Guard chopper arrived. Both birds spent the next hour patrolling the air and finding any stray boaters that were unaware of the situation. By 12:30, the Sentinel-class cutter Harlan arrived on the north side of the island. Its captain, Samuel Grade, was immediately brought to shore by the rigid-hulled cutter boat. Captain Grade was an inch taller than Nico and roughly the same age. In their first meeting at 12:30, he seemed skeptical about the existence of a Megalodon shark, despite the reports from the helicopter crews. The meeting was brief, with him setting up a small base camp on North Beach while he communicated with the chopper units and coordinated emergency efforts here on shore. One useful thing he accomplished was getting emergency medical flights near the island. Despite the increased number of personnel, the workload was still overwhelming. Even by mid-afternoon, the beach was still in chaos. The carnage was abundant. With the vast body count, it was impossible to get a handle on the number of people who were missing. The dispatch office was flooded with phone calls. Every resident or visitor who couldn't get in touch with a friend or loved one were ringing the telephone line. In some of these cases, it was a simple matter of a missed call or appointment, followed by nerves gone haywire. To make matters worse, Captain Grade demanded that all boats remain docked. The ocean was being treated as molten lava. Anyone that dared to pass over it was risking death. Nobody was allowed to leave the island unless it was by flight, and all private chopper and seaplane pilots were contracted by the island council. As far as the general population was concerned, they were trapped there until told otherwise. It was 4 o'clock when Nico's police force successfully got everybody off North Beach. The carnage itself had yet to be cleared. Ambulances were moving like buses, carrying dead and wounded to the hospital and returning for more. Then there were the pesky reporters, all of whom had an ounce of integrity between them. On multiple occasions, they felt the need to stick a microphone in Nico's face as he was hauling a twisted body out of the water. He thought he had seen it all in his days as a detective. The worst thing about working in that field was learning all the unique ways a person could die. He'd seen people stabbed, shot, mutilated, tortured, decomposed, and much more. Young and old, evil knew no bounds. But until now, he never knew mass death. A month ago, he was praised for presenting such a disaster. While not the deadliest tsunami ever recorded, it was still a force of nature that resulted in serious damage. Nico had taken great pride in the fact that there wasn't a single fatality, despite having almost no time to prepare. Today, it was as though nature was laughing in his face. He thwarted its plans once, so it sent its demon from the black abyss, driven out by the same meteor that launched the Great Wave. Nico knelt down on one knee, submerging himself up to his shoulders in water. Found another one. Paramedics waded in, followed by Rennie and Carly. Both were shaken by their failed attempt to stop the beast and the carnage they had to witness. But sitting in the office and doing nothing did nothing to calm their nerves. They needed to work, even if it meant subjecting themselves to more horrors brought by the shark. They each lowered themselves into the water and found something to grab onto. At a count of 3, they lifted the body out. It was shrunken. The face and torso caved in. Bones stuck out of the chest cavity like thorns. Carly felt her grasp starting to slip. She maintained control long enough to help carry the body to shore. Once there, she sprinted away and dry-heaved. Nico went to check on her, but Rennie got there first. Well, I know one good thing that resulted from today, Rennie said. Carly accepted the water bottle he offered her, took a small sip, then stood straight. Yeah? What's that? Considering all the first responder work we're doing, I can say I've earned the right to sleep in my own bed instead of the couch. That's what you think, Carly said. She dug her phone out and started texting. What do you think you're doing? It's been a shitty day. I need to do something to make me laugh. Carly sent the text, then showed it to him. Hey, just letting you know your husband's making fun at me for dry heaving. What? That's a lie. The response came in. That bastard. You'd think he'd know better. I'll take care of him when he gets home. Great. Rennie reread the reply, then grinned. Then again, by take care of me, she could have meant. Carly yanked the phone away and sent another text. Rennie cleared his throat. You're telling her what I just said, aren't you? Like I said, I need something amusing to happen. Torturing you always lifts my spirits. A moment later, Rennie's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, which showed a snapshot of his wife's text conversation with Carly and her reply. Yeah, buddy, keep dreaming. Even after blowing up my phone for 2 hours and being all worried about me, she goes right back to being mad at me on a dime, he said. Just her? Nico said. The two officers glanced back at him, then simultaneously laughed. It was a much-needed moment of levity, especially considering the day's work wasn't yet finished. Nico put a hand on their shoulders. In all seriousness, you guys kicked ass out there. Saved my ass, and I appreciate that. Well, we all owe you an apology for, making faces when you first said there was a giant shark during briefing. Nico looked down the beach, where his ex-wife and her assistant were standing. They were in conversation with Captain Grade, who was likely requesting intel about the creature. Can't say I acted much better when the situation was first brought to my attention, he said. Even with a dead whale with bite wounds as big as Rhode Island, it was hard to believe. I just hope the Coast Guard kills it, Carly said. She watched the beach and the first responders dredging the waters for remains. Hell, I might consider transferring after this. It'll be hard to look at this place the same way. This place will be dead for 5 years at minimum, Rennie said. The missus has brought up the desire to move. She's been craving a change of scenery. Yeah? Where'd you guys go? We don't have definite plans, but at the moment I'm thinking somewhere with woods. He smiled at the chief. You should come too. We'd make quite the team. You'd be the small-town sheriff, I'll be the deputy. We patrol the woods not worrying about giant sharks. Nope. Just Bigfoot, Carly said. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised, Nico said. For the first few moments, the thought of moving into the Midwest and policing a small country town sounded appealing. He loved nature, and thick woods was something he hadn't gotten to experience much. Staying on this island long-term no longer sounded appealing. There was one issue surrounding the idea of moving inland. There was no ocean. With no ocean, there would be no Denise. Oh, geez, go and kiss her already. This is worse than high school, Carly said. Huh, what? Oh, don't start with that, Carly said. You're watching your ex more intently than Rennie watches topless sunbathers on the beach, except with you there's a little sparkle in your eye. It's cute. There's no sparkle, Rennie shook his head. I got to agree with her, Chief. Not on the cute thing, though. I appreciate you clearing that up. For the second time, Nico placed a hand on their shoulders. You guys go back to the office and get in some dry clothes. I wish I could send you home, but unfortunately we're now short-staffed. How's Benny? Rennie asked. He'll be spending the night in the hospital. Maybe 2, but he'll be fine. Craig's in shock, though. Guy deserves a medal for keeping it together while we led the thing away from the beach. The moment of levity had passed. Multiple cops were dead. 2 more were out of commission. Many others would probably have to seek therapy for PTSD. Before anything could be done, that shark needed to be killed. See you guys later, he said. As he walked away, he looked back one last time. Carly, be nice to Rennie. Let the memory foam on his couch forget about him. She responded with an exaggerated sigh. If you say so, Chief. When Nico approached the Coast Guard captain, it was evident that the operation to hunt the shark was about to begin. The 2 choppers had landed for refuel and the cruiser was being prepped to return him to the cutter. The USCG Omega Fury was a 41-meter Sentinel-class cutter with a crew of 22. Its armament consisted of 4 50-caliber machine guns and an M242 Bushmaster autocannon. He had seen the Coast Guard sniper rifle successfully break its skin, so there was no doubt that the Bushmaster was more than enough to get the job done. and the shark would have a field day trying to break the reinforced steel hull of a cutter. It might rock the boat and nauseate the crew, but breaching? It would implode its own head before sinking that vessel. Among it were 3 medium-sized response boats. Each had a 3-man crew and were armed with 50-caliber machine guns. Unlike the cutter, those boats were vulnerable to the Megalodon's attacks. Captain Grade turned to face Nico after seeing him approach. "Ah, Chief. Good you're here. We're about to get started." "What's the plan, Captain?" "There's not much to it, Chief. It's big, but at the end of the day, it's just a fish. We're gonna lure it within range and blow the hell out of it with the Bushmaster. Already got my one-liner picked out. As my drill instructor used to say, sucks to be you." He chuckled. "Just have a little patience. This island will be yours again by sunset." "I'm looking forward to it," Nico said. He pointed to the smaller vessels cruising near the Omega Fury. "Listen, you might be better off simply using the choppers and the cutter. Those response boats won't stand a chance against the Megalodon." He noticed a slight smirk and headshake from the captain. Nico didn't know much about this man personally, but he knew those gestures. His concerns were being brushed away like pests from a picnic table. On top of that, Grade didn't think he'd notice, or the motions would have been more pronounced. "Don't worry, Chief," he said. "Our men are expert seamen. They know how to read sonar and maneuver a boat. Plus, those Brownings mounted on their deck pack a real punch. The shark will wish the meteor killed it." "You said you were going to bait it," Denise said. "Yeah, as a good old-fashioned chum. That's pretty standard for searching for sharks." "Yes, I know. I'm just informing you I'm not sure how quickly the Meg will respond. It's already fed heavily today, and I'm not sure how fast its digestive system works." "But we do know one thing," Nico said. "This fish responds quickly to threats. It might come at you, not for hunger, but for territorial reasons. It was fast to abandon an abundance of food at the beach to attack Denise's boat. Because of the size, I think it saw us as a challenger." Captain Grade chuckled. "And it's going to be in for a shock when it tries to go after my ship." "Captain, I'm just saying..." "Chief, with all due respect, this is my operation. I know what I'm doing. You just worry about keeping everyone else out of the water. Nobody leaves this island except by air." Captain Grade didn't bother waiting for an acknowledgement. He marched to his boat, boarded it, and started barking commands on his radio as the ensign on board started the engine. Nico looked at Denise. "How are you holding up? You all right?" "Can't say this has been a particularly glorious day," she said. "Overall, though, I'm doing all right. What about you?" "Hasn't been my favorite day on the job," he said. "We're still recovering bodies. To make matters worse, we'll be spending the next several days non-stop trying to sort out all the victims' identities. Considering several of them were swallowed whole or killed out at sea, that's going to be a real pain. Plus, people are already getting restless. Many of them want to leave, and now my police force has to act like Soviet Russia and keep them here. Add the fact that I had to visit 6 households today to inform the families of the men I lost. I think you get the idea what kind of day I'm having." "I'm sorry. Is there anything I can do?" "The only thing that can lift my spirits right now is chicken and rice." "Beg your pardon?" "You remember? I used to bake a chicken and rice recipe. I'd be taking bites out of it, scalding hot, as you'd take it out of the oven because it was so freaking good." It took Denise a moment to remember, after which she felt foolish. How could she have forgotten? In their 10 years of marriage, he craved that recipe practically every week. So much energy had been spent trying to forget it all. But now that the memories had been unlocked, she couldn't help but smile. "I am a kick-ass cook." "Nobody ever denied that," Nico said. "Then again, for all I know, you've probably lost your touch. You've been on the water constantly for the last 3 years. Can't imagine you do much cooking on that boat." "Hey now," Denise said. "For one, we actually do have a small stove and oven in the galley. Considering we're a small crew, it's suitable. Though a nice household stove is preferable, which leads me to my second point. No way in hell have I lost my touch, mister." "People so confident don't feel the need to be so defensive," Nico said, unable to hide his mischievous smile. "Oh, really? Why don't I prove it to you?" "Fine. My place at 8. I'll pick you up unless you don't think you're up to it." She scoffed. "I'll be there." "Good." They shared a laugh. It was short-lived thanks to a new radio transmission. "Dispatch to any available units. We have reports of a brawl over at the West Pier. Someone's trying to take their boat out." Nico threw his head back in frustration. "Oh, Jesus, won't the craziness ever end? Sorry, I have to run. No problem. You sure you won't be too busy with everything going on? Monroe County is sending some deputies to assist and a lieutenant to assist, Nico said. They'll be landing in a half hour or so. I'm going to have to sleep sometime. He hurried to his truck, then pointed at her as he got in. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, she replied with a thumbs up. Nico started the flashers and sped off to the other side of the island. Denise felt her spirits lift. After a dark day such as this, it was comforting to have something good occur. First, she would have to make a stop at the local grocery store. Chapter 28. The grocery store was packed. Denise found it simultaneously remarkable and sad how a shark attack triggered a wave of panic buying. People were stuffing their carts and baskets with pasta, bread, and yes, toilet paper. You'd think they were condemned to stay on this island for a lifetime. What should have been a quick 15-minute trip took over an hour, mainly because of the long lines. Luckily, she had no problem getting the chicken breasts. Apparently, poultry wasn't a delicacy in the apocalypse. The rice, on the other hand, was almost out. She had to reach in between a horde of customers to get the last couple of boxes. After getting her soup mix and other ingredients, she waited in line, which took up the bulk of that hour at the store. Jesus, fighting the Megalodon was more pleasant, she said to herself as she walked out, items in hand. It was 5:30 now. She heard a news report through somebody's car radio as she passed by. The reporter stating that the Coast Guard was commencing their operation on the south side of the island. They were following the shark's last known trajectory. The walk back to the northeast dock was relatively quiet. Most of the crowds were over at the western docks, where the ferries usually arrived. Those who weren't making life harder for the police were either spending their afternoons in their hotels or at the bar. The section of the beach near the docks was quiet as the attack happened further west. From 300 meters away, she could still see the recovery efforts. Boats kept to the shallows, dredging the bottom for remains. The shark nets had been removed to allow them easy access to the shore in case of another attack. The adjacent areas of the beach were vacant, as though the sand itself was haunted. Looks like I've got a couple of hours to kill. She boarded the vessel and went inside. Surprisingly, Cameron was nowhere to be seen. Hey, big guy, where are you? Still no answer. If he was in his cabin, he would have heard her. Denise went through the passageway into the galley. The groceries dropped from her hand as she saw her assistant sprawled out on the deck. His face was bloodied, his left eye swollen, his shirt stained red. Then came the feeling of a pistol placed against her temple. Aha! 2 other men stepped in from the next entryway, the crooks from the bank. Denise slowly raised her hands. What do you want? The thug with the gun pressed to her head was already eyeballing her figure. Well, Thatcher, the thug with the tan skin and dark hair said. He seemed slightly more in control than the man to her right. The third one, a short man with a hint of Asian in his ethnicity among a mix of others, stepped over and reached for her pants. Denise wheezed, assuming the worst. Oh, knock it off, he's just taking your phone, the second one said. He looked over to the one named Thatcher. Quit eye-fucking her. Stop telling me what to do, asshole. He tilted his head to examine her neckline. Gotta say, she looks better up close than she did from afar. You didn't even see her. You were too fixed on getting your cocaine and getting us killed in the process. Chris, I've had just about enough of you. I'm in charge of this gig. Seriously? The man named Chris said. That thing you have in mind, get it out of your mind. We need her. You said so yourself. Begrudgingly, Thatcher removed the pistol from her temple. I suppose you're right this time. Cameron gritted his teeth as he started to pick himself up off the floor. Thatcher immediately kicked him in the ribs. Don't move. Suck my nuts, Cameron snarled. Oh yeah? Thatcher knelt down and pressed the pistol to his mouth. Open up, see if you like sucking on this. Chris grabbed him by the shoulder and forced him back. Snap out of it, you're not helping the situation. He turned to look at the third member. Alan, find something to tie this guy's wrists behind his back. Denise felt her nerves going haywire. These guys were openly using their names in front of witnesses. Either they were extremely sloppy, or they had plans to dispose of them after they got whatever use they apparently needed. And once disposable, Thatcher would probably have free rein to fulfill his sick fantasies. Chris's eyes turned toward her. What's your name? Why are you here? She said. Don't make me ask you again, he said. His voice was more intense this time, making Denise realize that behind that calm demeanor was an extremely violent man. Considering the kind of company he kept, he had no qualms about killing. Denise? Denise, where's the police chief? He asked. I know he was on your boat. I saw you back at the exchange. Considering you were working with the cops, we were looking for the shark, she said. Then the call came in. Yeah, we get it, Alan said. Where is the shark? Thatcher said. I have no idea. The Coast Guard's looking for it right now, she said. No boats are allowed on the water until they've confirmed it's dead. Perfect, Thatcher said. Then we won't have to worry about anyone interfering. Except the Coast Guard themselves, Alan said. Interfering? With what? Denise said. Thatcher leaned in close, so close that she could smell his stale breath and see the mild signs of decay in his lower incisors. You're going to pay us back for the merchandise that you lost. I didn't lose anything, Denise said. Thatcher grabbed her by the jaw. Oh yeah, you did. You helped the cops. You played a huge role in what happened, and now you're going to help us get our supplies back. Denise yanked her head away from his grasp. How? You're a marine biologist, are you not? Chris said. Yes? That means you can dive, correct? No, actually a good number of us don't dive, fortunately or unfortunately. I do. Knowing it was best not to overcomplicate things, she simply nodded. Good. Here's the plan. We're going to head back to the site where we made our drug deal. You're going to dive and recover 2 briefcases. One has over $1 million in cash, the other has 10 kilos of cocaine. 9, Thatcher said. 9, whatever. You are going to recover it. Then you're going to take us wherever we tell you to go. That's over 200 feet deep, Denise said. You saying you can't dive 200 feet? Thatcher said. It's going to be very difficult to find your supplies down there in that darkness. And what if we run into the shark? You said the Coast Guard is hunting it. We can monitor their frequencies, Alan said. No, we can't. We're not the CIA. They don't use open frequencies to communicate, Denise said. Chris broke eye contact, realizing she had a point. His expression livened, and he turned back toward her. No, but they will keep constant communication with the local police department, who in turn will keep the local news updated. And you know them. The minute they hear that the Coast Guard finds the thing, they'll blast it all over the radio. Possibly. And then we'll go out and do what we need to do, Thatcher said. Alan leaned against the refrigerator and scratched his head. Assuming they don't engage the shark close by. The wreck is southeast of us. As long as they state their general location when they announce they found the shark and it's far enough away, then we'll be good to go, Chris said. Thatcher put his boot into Cameron's ribs, then pointed a finger at Denise. You will dive. If you refuse, I'll pop a hole in the side of your buddy's head, then I'll deal with you. Believe me, it won't be as quick. Not even Chris will do anything to stop it at that point. It took every ounce of strength for Denise not to scream and run. Such situations were seen in the movies, but rarely did anybody actually experience such a thing. First I nearly get devoured. Now I'm being held at gunpoint and forced to recover lost drugs. She looked down at Cameron. He was barely conscious, the skin around his wrist already red from the tight bindings. They had probably forced their way in and put a gun in his face, then beat the hell out of him for the fun of it. Or maybe it was to bloody him up and reinforce the threat of killing him unless she did as instructed. One thing was for sure. They had no qualms about killing. Okay. Just don't hit him anymore. Fine. Just don't do anything dumb, Chris said. He knelt down and grabbed Cameron by the arm. On your feet, mashed potato. We're heading up to the wheelhouse. Gotta keep an eye on that radio. Chapter 29. Almost 20 years in the United States Coast Guard, having just signed papers for another 6-year term, Captain Grade thought he had seen it all. He had been part of missions to the Antarctic, intercepted Colombian drug dealers in the Gulf Coast, and performed several rescue missions in hurricane season. He had seen his fair share of death, especially in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2004. That was his first true wake-up call regarding nature's wrath. He always hoped he wouldn't see such a horrific disaster again. In the event of the meteor tsunami, he was relieved that the casualties were fairly low along the Bahamas and the Florida Keys. There were still repairs needed to be done, but the damage was minimal overall. Grade remembered feeling relieved. Maybe that would be the year's worst event. Then came the emergency notification that a giant shark was attacking Cielo Nublado. He didn't often question orders, It wasn't proper. The Coast Guard wasn't necessarily known for its high-ranking officers playing pranks. But a giant shark attacking an island? No, it had to be a joke. Even as he left Key West, he was wondering what he was truly heading into. Only after seeing the aftermath and various footage of the event was he finally convinced. The captain stood in the bridge, watching the chopper units pepper the surrounding water with dead shark. In the 90 minutes they had been hunting, there was no sign of the target. Either it was actively avoiding them, or was simply hunting on another part of the island. "Perhaps we should have taken that marine biologist along as a consultant," he said. The chief petty officer turned away from the sonar operator. "Pardon me, Captain, but what use would she be? Yeah, it's a dangerous animal, but at the end of the day, it's nothing more than a big fish. There's not much to it." "A big fish that we didn't know existed until today," Grade said. "This is Chopper 4 to Omega Fury." The officers turned to the radio man to watch as he took the call. "Fury here? I got something, about a click north of our position, moving fast." Grade looked to the sonar operator. "Any readings?" The guardsman nodded. "Aye, sir. Large submarine object moving at 5 miles per hour, moving toward the bait." "That's gotta be it." Grade switched on his own radio. "Chopper 4, move in for visual. Boats 45, 44, and 43 close in on their position. Lower the bastard to the surface so we can get a clear shot at it." The boat operators replied with, "Aye, aye, sir." The captain turned to the radioman. "Alert the local PD, inform them that we've located the shark and are about to initiate our attack. They'll have their beaches back by tomorrow." "Aye, aye, Captain." The radioman switched channels to 9. "This is the United States Coast Guard Omega Fury calling Cielo Nublado Police Department." "Right? Good. I appreciate you keeping me informed. Kill that thing," Nico said. Professional? Not really. Did he care? Definitely not. The news that they had located the shark came at the perfect time. It was a couple of minutes to 8, following an exhausting afternoon of de-escalating the crisis on the island. Around 6, his reinforcements arrived and went straight to work policing the island. Rennie and Carly, among many other officers, volunteered to stay late and show them the ropes. In that time, the uneasy population began to settle down. Word that the Coast Guard was hunting the fish seemed to ease the panic. At around 7, attempts to leave the island by boat finally ceased. Nico had to endure a little name-calling that he wasn't used to. Typically, he was called a fascist pig, skinhead, despite being Latino and having a head full of hair. Bully, power-hungry, and right-wing. Of course, anything to the right of Lenin was considered right-wing to some of these clowns. Today, however, he was called the opposite, totalitarian, oppressor, typical of some of the college-age talking points, except this time he felt it might have been somewhat true. He wasn't used to this martial law method of policing, and frankly, he didn't like it. These were the days when police could not win. Throughout his career, Nico had experienced his fair share of criticism, but nothing compared to today. The media was already reporting that he knew of the shark's existence, yet allowed people in the water anyway. So far, the good old mayor didn't do anything to counter these reports. Robert Zahn was a good guy until his own reputation was threatened. In such a case, he would use anyone he could as a human shield against negative press. He was on his second and final term as mayor for Cielo Nublado. A community with many immigrants from Cuba, they understood the importance of term limits no matter what office. With his mind on expanding his political career, Robert would not want to leave this island bearing responsibility for a massive death toll. No Kevlar was strong enough to protect against the onslaught of media bullets. He was surprised they left him alone to focus on the issues at hand. Tomorrow, once the shark was dead, it would be a different story. He would tell the truth, that he alerted the island council and they dismissed his claims, and they would fire back, probably with a character assassination. The thing Nico feared most was the lengths they possibly would go. Robert Zahn knew of the circumstances why he left Texas and was very sympathetic about it. Still, his own skin was what mattered most to him. If he used the accident as a sign of Nico's bad judgment, Nico would find himself facing the inside of his own jail cell, because at minimum he would beat Robert to a pulp. Maybe this was fate. While Nico truly believed this island to be beautiful, he wasn't here out of a love for paradise. It was the first escape route. Surrounding oneself with gorgeous scenery sometimes was enough to obscure the demons that clawed at his psyche. But that scenery had been tattered by death, and the island's natural beauty no longer served as a mental shield. The only way to defeat those demons was to face them directly. 24 hours ago, the thought of meeting with Denise made him so anxious he almost felt nauseated. Now, in spite of everything that occurred today, he was feeling the opposite. She was the one he'd turn to when a day on the job was rough. Whenever he needed to open up after seeing a human being reduced to pus after being left in a basement for a month, she'd be the one he would talk to. Seeing the manta ray up ahead lifted his spirits in the same way as when he saw her car in his driveway back in Waco. He pulled up to the pier and waited. A few minutes went by and she didn't show. The lights were on in the pilot house and quarters. She was definitely there. Perhaps she lost track of the time. Nico called her cell phone. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. He sent a text. "Hey, I'm out here by the dock." No reply. Probably got lost in paperwork or something researchy. Not a big deal. Going up and knocking on the door took him back to their first date. He was patrol sergeant at that time and she was living at home completing her doctorate. The fact that he was an officer meant nothing to her father. He looked at Nico with the same suspicion as he would some alley cat sniffing for some tail. A father always protected his child, no matter their age. That first meeting made Nico feel like a teenager again, especially after getting the look from Mr. Rada. It was one of those "don't do anything stupid or I'll beat your face in" looks. Nico knew when a guy meant it, and Mr. Rada was not the type to kid around. It took a few visits for him to warm up to Nico. Still, that threat of an ass-kicking lingered all the way up to their wedding. Nico boarded the vessel and knocked on the aft passageway entrance. Part of him almost anticipated someone like her father to be on the other side of that door, ready to deck him. After a minute, he knocked again. He heard footsteps on the other side, but nobody opened the door. "Denise? Hello?" He tried the handle. It was unlocked. He opened the door and peeked inside. "Hey, it's me. Where are you at?" His life flashed before his eyes as a fist struck his jaw. Instinct kicked in. Nico threw back, hitting the assailant in the nose and knocking him back. Before he could draw his pistol, he was struck in the temple by the butt of a shotgun. He hit the deck, then curled his hands and knees as a series of kicks pummeled him. The muzzle of that shotgun was pressed to his temple, halting any desire to continue fighting. It took a second for his vision to clear. When he looked up, he recognized the 3 men standing above him. The one with the shotgun was Chris Hebron. Standing beside him was Alan Lowe and Ed Thatcher, the latter of which was kneeling to remove his Glock and radio. "Thanks for sending that text," he said. "Came in handy for us to know you were coming." "On your feet," Chris said. Slowly, Nico stood up. He kept a straight posture despite the urge to hunch over. He took a few good kicks to the gut and everything inside felt like mush. All 3 men had weapons trained on him. If he had learned anything from the previous encounter as well as their criminal history, it was that these guys were trigger-happy. "What are you doing here? Where's Denise and Cameron?" "They're fine," Chris said. "Whether they stay that way depends on how well you all cooperate." "Cooperate? What's the big idea?" Nico said. "We're going to retrieve our lost merchandise," Chris said. "You and your lady friend are going to help us do that." Nico watched the guns they pointed at him, partially to make sure their itchy trigger fingers didn't look like they would accidentally discharge them. If those bastards didn't have those guns, he'd take all 3 of them on right now. Nico was no stranger to brawling. In fact, he enjoyed a good fight. If only these assholes didn't have Denise hostage. "Where are they?" he asked. "They're fine," Chris said. "Yeah? Prove it, because your word's worth nothing to me," Nico said. Thatcher laughed, then raised his pistol to eye level. "Forget it. We don't even need this guy." Chris grabbed him by the wrist, forcing the gun away. "Yes, we do. He's leverage." "Leverage? What exactly is your plan?" "Your lady friend is going to retrieve 2 briefcases from the area the plane went down," Chris said. "Now that we have you, she'll have a little extra incentive." "Yeah? So why the delay? Waiting for me?" "No, actually, she cleverly left out the fact that you were coming," Chris said. "You might have had the drop on us had you not texted her." He held up Denise's iPhone. In the middle of the screen was Nico's recent text. Alan Lowe stepped behind the chief and pushed him forward. They went up the steps and entered the pilot house. Seated on the deck beside the console were Denise and Cameron. Both had their hands tied behind their backs and duct tape over their mouths. Denise didn't appear to be injured. Cameron, though, looked as if he'd gone toe-to-toe with Mike Tyson. His face was swollen and bruised, and by the way he was hunched, he had taken several hits to the midsection, possibly resulting in cracked ribs. He looked at his attackers. "You bastards." Thatcher shoved him forward. "Get in there." Nico stepped by his ex-wife. "You all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. He looked at them again. "Is the gagging necessary?" "I'll take it off once we're out of here," Chris said. He looked at Alan, then cocked his head at the chief. Alan approached with a roll of duct tape, yanked Nico's hands behind his back, then wrapped the tape around his wrists. It was a humiliating feeling. Nico had more than his fair share of encounters with criminals, but never had he been a hostage. To think of how easily they overpowered him made him angrier. At that moment, the evening dispatcher's voice came through the radio. "We've got Coast Guard choppers moving to the north. They're in pursuit of the Megalodon." The criminals looked at each other and smiled. "Well, would you look at that?" Thatcher said. "We don't need to hope for a media broadcast." "No, I suppose we don't," Chris said. He looked at Nico. "You coming here proved more useful than we ever could have hoped for. Now we can finally get started." He nodded at Alan, who knelt behind Denise and cut the tape from her wrists. She yanked the tape from her mouth and threw it at Chris. She knew he wouldn't shoot her. Can't dispose of his only chance of regaining the drugs and cash. However, they had a couple of other people they could use to make their point. Thatcher made Nico an example by striking him across the temple, knocking him to his side. "Take us out," he said. "If your hand goes anywhere near that radio, you'll get a free course in neurology. We'll show you parts of the human brain piece by piece. At least we'll do our best. It'll be hard to decipher after the shotgun blows his fucking head off." Denise looked at Nico, then at Chris. "Don't hit them anymore. We'll get you your shit, and you go off on your way. You can even have the boat." "We'll negotiate all that after. Start the engine." Nico rolled back to a seated position, then nodded at Denise. "Just do as I say." Begrudgingly, Denise approached the helm. She hated relenting to the will of these killers, but doing nothing would guarantee further harm to Nico and Cameron. On the other hand, she understood Nico's tone. The gears in his head were turning. He was already figuring out a plan. She just needed to have faith that he could come up with something fast enough, and that he could pull it off. In the meantime, she would just have to obey the gang's demands. She started the boat up and throttled it southeast for Yaque's grave. Chapter 30. "Chopper 4 in position. Gunners ready to turn the thing to sushi." "Leave that to the Bushmaster," Grade said. All units were in position. The Omega Fury's bow was pointed at the incoming shark. Boats 44 and 45 were 200 meters off the starboard bow, and 43 several hundred left of them. Their goal was to shepherd the fish into the kill zone in case it tried to divert. It was still running deep, out of sight except for the choppers. Even they could only see the faint silhouette, like an ominous shadow moving under the surface. With the light dwindling, they would soon lose all visual unless the creature came up to the surface. "The problem with our bait is that it sinks," Grade said. An idea came to mind. It was risky, though not much riskier than what they were already attempting. "Chopper 5, decrease altitude to 2 meters. Draw that bastard up. We'll monitor its position. When it ascends, haul ass." "Aye, aye, Captain." Captain Grade watched from the bridge as the orange and white chopper moved east, then settled in the Megalodon's path. The setting sun reflected off its hull, making the aircraft appear like a star glistening above the ocean. "Biologic increasing speed, moving toward 5 at 12 miles per hour, the sonar operator said. That was more than double the previous speed. The plan was working. In a few moments, the captain would be able to brag that he led the only operation that successfully killed a Megalodon shark. He stood by the sonar operator and watched the screen. "Chopper 5, prepare to ascend in 5, 4, 3. "Sir, bogey's changing course," the operator said. "Going due west, 20 knots. "What the?" Grade watched the blip on the screen move to the left. "Chopper 5, do you have visual?" "Negative, sir. Lost it as soon as it changed course." "Why the hell would it retreat?" the petty officer said. "I don't know. Maybe it saw the ship and thought it was a bigger fish. I don't know," Grade said. He allowed a split-second groan. For a moment it looked like the job was going to be easy, literally as simple as drawing the fish in and blasting it to oblivion. As luck would have it, it had to retreat. "Let's go after it. Chopper units, I want you to pursue. Draw it back up. According to the police chief, it had no qualms about going after helicopters. Use your sniper rifles if you have to." 4 copies, 5 copies, moving west." "I still don't get it," the chief petty officer said. "It should have detected us much sooner. I don't get why it decided to run all of a sudden." Grade took a sip from his coffee thermos. The flavor was the only thing going in his favor so far today. "Well, it's a fish. I guess it got scared. What's got you so worried? You think it's strategically luring us away?" The officer laughed. "No, Captain, I just find it odd that it would suddenly go that way." It's not even going west, it's going southwest. If it was running from us, wouldn't it go north? You're thinking about this too hard. Let's just kill the bastard and get this over with. He turned to the radio operator. I want all units pursuing the target. Gunners, remain on standby. Chapter 31. I repeat, Cielo Nublado PD, we are still pursuing target. It is westbound, heading for the Keys. The dispatcher's voice followed the Coast Guard's transmission. We copy. Keep us informed. Nico noticed Thatcher rubbing his hands together in satisfaction. As luck would have it, the Coast Guard was practically helping them at this point. Both the shark and the only authorities that could stop them were going in the opposite direction. As far as the police were concerned, Nico was at home on his couch. Nobody, not even Rennie, had the guts to pay him a personal visit if he didn't answer. The sight of Chris's shotgun to Denise's back was infuriating. His heart raced as though he had swallowed a half-dozen sugar pills. He'd seen people held at gunpoint, negotiated his way through more than his fair share of hostage situations. Never, though, had he experienced the angst of having someone close to him as the victim. On one occasion, he led an operation to de-escalate a hostage situation involving a bitter ex-boyfriend who held his former flame at gunpoint. That situation ended favorably, with the guy coming to his senses and surrendering. When leading the cuffed suspect to the squad car, Nico had to fend off a vehemently angry father. It took 3 cops to keep him off the suspect. Back then, Nico understood how he felt. Any man with the slightest sense of empathy would. Now, he really understood how he felt. That anger only intensified when he looked over at Cameron. The research assistant's left eye was nearly swollen shut at this point. He was still hunched over in pain. Cameron was no pushover. He enjoyed a good fight. In his Marine days, he probably could have taken all 3 of these thugs. If he was this subdued, it meant 2 things. He was in significant pain, and he didn't want to risk Denise's safety. We're here, Denise said. Good. Chris turned to Alan. Go out and drop the anchor. The timid thug had a little more spring in his step as he went out the door. The news of the Coast Guard chasing the Megalodon to the west had eased his concerns about getting caught. Time for you to get changed, Missy, Thatcher said. Another sadistic smile creased his face. Unless you'd prefer to dive in your birthday suit. Denise ignored the statement. She looked past Thatcher at Chris. Hot-tempered and murderous, he was clearly the more level-headed one of the group. In this case, that was like saying she'd rather get covered in bird shit than pig shit. Uncover their mouths, she said, pointing at the 2 hostages. Chris put his finger to her face. Listen, lady, I'm the one who gives the orders around here. Don't forget who's the head of this group, Thatcher muttered. Shut the fuck up, you stupid junkie. If not for your issues, we wouldn't be in this mess, Chris said. He turned back to Denise, who stood arms crossed and tilting her head toward the men. Muttering a few curse words under his breath, he tore the tape from their mouths. Ah! Cameron exclaimed. Get over it, Chris said. On your feet, you're coming outside with us. It'll be best for Miss Scientist to be able to see you when she surfaces. I don't want to waste time with her worrying about your well-being. Nico stood up quick. Cameron was struggling, his face radiating pain. Had his hands not been bound behind his back, Nico would assist him. All he had was the goodwill of those around him. Too bad he was surrounded by murderers. Help him, he said. Why, he having trouble? Thatcher said. Yes, actually, no thanks to you guys, Nico said. He didn't do anything to you. He never crossed you. You broke in. And kicked his ass, Thatcher said. He laughed like a cartoon villain. Maybe it was the drugs he was taking that forged such a delusion of grandeur. Nico had put away enough drug addicts to know what one looked like. The constant sniffling, the enlarged pupils, the aggressive behavior. Unlike Chris, who was using aggression to maintain control, Thatcher seemed violent just for the sake of it. Christ. Chris grabbed Cameron by the arm and lifted him to his feet. How you feeling, man? Nico said. Cameron spat blood onto the floor, then looked at him. Like a big fat piñata. You probably are full of candy, considering. Thatcher prodded his belly, then laughed. Cameron shook his head. Boy, if you and I were on the streets and you didn't have that gun. Thatcher thrust the pistol against his face. You'd do what? I'd give you 300 pounds of ass-whooping. You'd look like a mashed potato after I was through with you. Thatcher mimicked fright, dropping his jaw and bringing his hands to his face. Oh, my. Oh! I'm losing my patience, Chris said, waving his hand toward the door. Out on deck. I'm not going to tell you again. Cameron eyed the drug addict. Yeah, take a step closer. I dare you. Then he looked at Denise, remembered what was at stake, then dialed his aggression back. With enough time, maybe he'd get a shot at some payback. Just the thought of it gave him a hit of dopamine which dulled the pain from his cracked ribs. He could only imagine how good it'd feel to actually follow through. Until then, he would have to comply. The group descended to the main deck. Alan stood ready, holding a submachine gun in hand. He looked at the setting sun. Its golden rays were blinding, forcing everyone to face the opposite direction. "How long should this take? It'll be dark soon," he said. "I can get down there faster with my diver propulsion vehicle," Denise said. "You'll have to allow me time to surface. I'll have to make several safety stops." "Won't it be too dark down there?" Nico said. "Not with a good flashlight," Chris said. "A diver like her probably has 100, right?" "Well, not 100, but yes, I do have a light." "You expect her to swim all the way up with 2 briefcases?" Cameron said. "That's nonsense." "We'll send a line down with her," Chris said. "She can attach them to the briefcases and we can pull them up so she doesn't have to. We'll even attach some light sticks to the end of the rope so she can easily locate them." "How considerate of you," Denise said. A blow to the face caught her off guard. The world spun. Everything was bright, as though the sun was shining from all directions. "God damn it, Thatcher," Chris said. "You son of a bitch." Chris saw Nico stepping forward and immediately hit him in the forehead with the butt of his shotgun. This time it was the chief's world that was spinning. He stumbled back and hit the guardrail, blood trickling from his brow. When his vision cleared, he saw Thatcher standing over his ex-wife. "Shut your mouth, bitch. If you want to open it again, I can think of something it can be used for." He undid the button of his jeans. This time it was Cameron who snapped. For a hefty guy with cracked ribs, he was spry, enough so that Chris couldn't catch him. He body-slammed Thatcher, knocking him to the gunwale. "Leave her alone!" A single crack echoed through the evening air. Before the sound faded, it was followed by the dull thud from Cameron's body hitting the deck. Denise scurried back, her eyes locked on the bullet hole in her friend's forehead. "God damn it, Thatcher," Chris said. "You saw it," Thatcher shouted back. Nico was on his feet again, his senses back in full force, the sight of Cameron's death sparking a burst of adrenaline that almost made it impossible to control himself. Noticing this, Chris was fast to turn his shotgun on him. "Don't try it, Chief, or you're next." "Oh, so you can shoot him, but it's bad if I do it?" Thatcher said. "Dude, will you shut the fuck up?" Chris pushed him aside and approached the body. One less hostage, thus less leverage to use against Denise. Now all they had was the chief. If any good came from this, it was that she now knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they weren't bluffing. He could tell she was on the verge of an outburst. If so, it would lead to defiance, unless they motivated her to keep her eyes on the prize. Chris looked at Alan, then tilted his head to the chief. "Rough him up a tad." Alan approached Nico, only to hesitate when met with a sneering expression of a man who could easily break every bone in his body. The fact that his hands were bound made no difference. "What a pussy," Thatcher said. He took the initiative, strutting across the deck and hit Nico in the face. Multiple blows to the midsection followed. Once again, Nico was crouched in a fetal position as he absorbed the abuse. "Okay, all right, stop," Denise said. Chris grabbed Thatcher by the collar and pulled him backward, not bothering to waste time with verbal commands. As far as Thatcher was concerned, he was still the leader of this gang. "Go get in your suit," Chris said. "I'll go down with her and make sure she doesn't try anything stupid," Thatcher said. "Yeah, no, you've already proven you've got more on the brain than drugs and cash," Chris said. "I'll keep an eye on her. You and Alan get rid of that." He pointed at Cameron's body. He helped Denise to her feet, then goaded her to the lower decks. Chapter 32. "Christ, is this guy trying to swim right into the sun?" U.S. Coast Guard sniper Craig Bryan said. His thick aviator sunglasses could only partially hinder the direct rays of the setting sun. He could only imagine how his pilots felt, being as they had to stare directly into it. The target had angled to its right, leading them directly west. "There is good news," the pilot Jack Cordell said. "The fish is slowing down." "Good. Maybe I can get another shot at the prick," Bryan said. He was still buzzing from the previous encounter with the shark and craving a second shot at it. The captain's plan to hit it with the Omega Fury's autocannon was a disappointment to him. Bryan wanted another crack at killing the thing himself. Captain Grade's voice boomed through their headsets. "Target slowing down. Turning southeast again. Get ahead of it and draw it up." "We'll do our best, Captain," Cordell said. He looked over at the co-pilot, Mark Evans. "Ready to risk our asses again?" "Do we have a choice?" We can ask 5 to do it, Brian said. You just want to shoot the thing, Evan said. What's the problem with that? Nothing, except that's not our orders, Evan said. Last time you shot it, the thing ran. The point is to keep the thing from running. Cordell wasn't in the mood for banter. He flicked a few switches on the instrument panel. Deploying Hellras. The sonar dipped into the water. It's up ahead 10 degrees to port. It's continuing south, Evan said. Brian, hang ready with that rifle. You might get your precious opportunity if that thing tries to take a bite out of us, Cordell said. Brian already had the weapon positioned. The pilots rotated the chopper, facing his rifle out in the shark's direction. In doing so, the co-pilot checked the status of the other units. Chopper 5 was circling high, while the 3 response boats were forming another spread like a football defense team ready to intercept the shark. Each gunner was in position, each one as eager as Brian to carve the fish like a pumpkin with 50 caliber rounds. 1,500 feet back was the Omega Fury, its engines pushing it at full speed. The American flag waved proudly behind the bridge. In front of it, the Bushmaster rotated to port. Unfortunately for the response boat gunners, the 25mm gun would get first dibs. Ensign Brian blew raspberries like a grumpy toddler. He was proud to serve in the Coast Guard and had every intention to re-enlist at the end of his 4 years. The only drawback were the remarks from ignorant civilians who never served a day in their life. Most respected the service, but there were those who joked that people joined the Coast Guard because they couldn't handle the real military. Once he heard that from someone in the Florida National Guard, a weekend warrior with no self-awareness. Then there were asshats from the Army and Marines, when most of them joked it was friendly fun. All the branches talked shit about the other. But like with all groups, there were jerks that actually felt the Coast Guard was useless and that Brian should have joined an actual infantry unit. If he could kill that damn shark himself, that would shut up any naysayers. Already he was practicing his in-your-face victory speech. What asshole in the Army, Marines, or Navy can say they killed an 80-foot killer shark? Nobody, that's who. Took a Coast Guard sniper to do it. It would make a better headline than if the cutter did the job. A steel ship against a fish half its size? It'd be a unique headline, though it wouldn't impress the naysayers. It's turning around, Evan said, increasing speed, ascending rapidly. Coming right at us? Brian said. Negative, Evan said. It's going for 43. It's heading right toward you guys. As he spoke, the dorsal fin made its appearance. Behind it was a swift caudal fin kicking water with each rapid movement. The shark was over 400 feet to Chopper 4's port side, closing on its target. Boat 43 was turning to port. Its gunners spotted the oncoming fin and began firing. Bullets plunged into the water, drawing blood from the shark's back. By the looks of it, the damage they caused only seemed to motivate the shark further. Brian's hand quivered. He tried to center the fish in his crosshairs, nearly succeeding until the pilots decided to elevate the chopper. Damn it! He put his eye back to the scope, then found the fish a second time. By then, it was too late. The shark dipped, arched under the water, then ascended underneath the vessel. Boat 43 looked as weightless as a toy model as it was flung into the air. The shark followed it, spitting out chunks of hull mid-flight. Gravity brought both of them back down. What followed were a series of thrashing motions as the shark proceeded to seek out the fallen guardsman. Through the scope, Brian watched 3 separate blood clouds appear around the wreckage. 44 and 45 closed in on the beast, splitting in opposite directions to create a crossfire. Bogey's moving north. 45, it's going for you next. Where? We don't see anything. Oh my God! The crash could be heard through the receiver and across the ocean. Boat 45 exploded as though a bomb had been planted underneath it. Through the cloud of wreckage emerged the fish. In its jaws were 2 crewmen, both impaled on its lower jaw and writhing in agony. The shark closed its mouth, instantly reducing them to pulp. It took Brian a moment to identify the position of the helmsman. Even if he was dead, he would still be floating due to wearing a life jacket. To his great surprise, he spotted the man alive and conscious roughly 15 feet to the right. Despite the trauma of the explosive impact that ravaged his boat, he was vigorously swimming away from the wreckage. The will to survive was strong enough to overpower haziness and pain, but not strong enough to grant him the strength to outswim a killer shark. The fish had detected his movements and began to pursue, traveling along the surface. Do not fire, Omega Fury. I repeat, do not fire. We have a man in the kill zone, Chopper 5's pilot announced. Stand by, Brian said into his microphone. I have a shot. He didn't wait for orders from his commanding officer. He adjusted the scope for distance and wind speed, followed the dorsal fin, and aimed 30 feet ahead of it. He fired 3 times, the weapon kicking back against his shoulder with each discharge. The Meg had opened its mouth, its snout towering above its next snack when the bullet struck near its right eye. Spurting blood, the fish dove again, the resulting waves pushing the guardsman further to the south. "Nice shot, you hit it, 4, Chopper 5's pilot said. "Gotta give Brian credit for that one," Cordell said. "Damn right," Brian said. "Now is not the time to break out the champagne," Captain Grade said. "Chopper 5, move down and get the ensign, on the double." The captain didn't bother hiding his frustration. He had openly stated he expected this to be a smooth operation, and it turned out to be anything but. 5 men had just died under his command. Certainly he was going to face reprimand by his commander over in Mayport. There would be a hearing and maybe even a demotion. He would express how he was facing unprecedented circumstances. Deep down, Brian hoped they would still ding him for using small response boats despite receiving reports from the local police that the shark had sunk several boats of similar size. The only one that could withstand a hit from the fish was the Omega Fury. Bait. The bastard had used them as bait, and was naive enough to think he would be able to gun the fish down before suffering any casualties. Chopper 5 was hovering 15 feet above the swimmer. He was passed out now, bobbing in the water like a fishing lure. With no hopes of the man putting the quick strap around himself, one of the crew members drove into the water. "Hustle it up," Grade said. The rescue swimmer grabbed a hold of his fellow guardsman, looped the quick strap under his arms, then signaled to the other crew members to hoist him up. Brian watched as the chopper crew lifted the 2 men out of the water. Then, as though determined not to let them out of its reach, the ocean lashed out with a claw-like wave. From underneath that wave came the Megalodon. As quickly as it appeared, the 2 dangling men vanished. Closing its jaws, the Meg returned to the water, cable in tow. Chopper 5's engine stalled as it was dragged down by the immense force. "Mayday! We're going down!" Rhetorical as anyone with 2 eyes could see the aircraft make its plunge. The spiraling rotors snapped after slicing the water, sending huge slivers of metal skidding over the ocean. The tail broke, snapping like a twig, the windshield imploding into shards which lacerated the pilots. If the smell of fuel and water distortion from the craft's weight wasn't already enough to draw the shark back, the smell of their blood sealed their fate. The Megalodon struck from underneath. For a moment, the chopper was airborne again. The shark drove its snout into the fuselage, folding the steel frame inward. It bit on the deck and shook the fuselage left and right, literally trying to shake the humans out. 2 more shots rang out from Brian's rifle. They struck the fish along its head, drawing blood but not repelling it from its evil deed. Boat 44 moved in from the south. "The fuselage is in the way. We can't get a shot." "Maintain your distance," Grade said. "But sir, you want that thing to come at you? Hold your damn distance." The Megalodon proceeded to ravage the chopper. Brian could imagine the men inside bouncing off the walls like ping-pong balls. Their only hope, if they were still alive, was him. He loaded a fresh magazine. 5 bullets. Just one of them needed to hit the shark's brain. And judging by the way it took the last 2 shots, it was too preoccupied to worry about the injuries it sustained from the rifle. Maybe it didn't feel them that time. Maybe it was focused on attacking the chopper, or maybe it believed they didn't do much damage. How smart was a giant shark? Did it understand injuries, or was it just so determined to kill that it didn't give a damn? The sniper lined his muzzle with the shark's head. Up and down, left and right, the target was in constant motion. Constant, but persistent. Maybe the creature was more mechanically minded than it led him to believe. Up, down, left, right. Brian squeezed the trigger. His first shot hit the fish in the snout. The second struck 2 feet to the left. The third hit the lower jaw, sending a tooth rocketing away like a NASA shuttle. The 4th shot landed near the edge of its mouth. It was the 5th bullet that grabbed the shark's attention. What was once the shark's right eye was now a mangled heap of flesh that resembled a crushed grape. It spat out the helicopter and raced along the ocean, thrashing its head and tail. Brian smiled, so pleased with his marksmanship that he nearly forgot that 7 guardsmen were dead. He watched the shark as he reloaded his weapon. The way it moved reminded him of an earthworm he used as bait when fishing as a child. It was a struggle to get the little invertebrate on a hook because it was writhing so much. No matter how hard it tried, he always overpowered it. As far as he was concerned, no matter how hard the fish moved, it would not escape the wrath of his weapon. Unless it dived, of course. Brian wasn't concerned of that happening, because it was now moving right toward them. Blood gushing from the hole where its eye had been, it sliced through the ocean, its teeth sparkling against the sunlight. Brian wondered if it knew the shot came from his chopper. Fine with me. Makes for an easy shot. As though reading his mind, the pilots elevated the chopper. Perfect. Brian now could plant all 5 rounds straight down into the shark's head. A good tight grouping would land one of those bullets in or near its brain. He figured it had to be a somewhat easy target to hit. Such a big head meant a large brain. He centered the crosshairs between the eyes, then launched all 5 rounds in quick succession. Blood jetted from the shark's head as though blown out by a hose. The fish lurched, and like the worm on Brian's fishing hook, it thrashed both head and tail. The ocean churned from non-stop coiling. It wasn't dead, but there was certainly significant damage done to its neurocortex. It rolled as a crocodile did when killing a victim. In this case, the fish was the victim. Finally, it had a taste of its own medicine. After all the death and destruction it had caused, it now was getting what it deserved. Better yet, Brian's ego never felt more inflated. All those people who talked down to him about not being a real soldier would shut their pie holes from now on. Nobody would talk trash to a guy who single-handedly killed a giant shark responsible for the deaths of dozens of people. Another full magazine found its way into the rifle frame. As he did when the shark was shaking the fuselage, he timed its movements. He needed to plant more bullets straight down on the top of its head, right into the brain cavity. That was it. Final victory and certain promotion. And an in-your-face to all the jackasses who talked shit to him. Brian timed the creature's movements, placed his finger on the trigger, then started to squeeze. In rapid succession, blood spurted from the shark's body. From head to tail, its body opened up as though an invisible chainsaw was cutting through it. The echo of heavy gunshots reached his ears. The Omega Fury had opened fire with its autocannon. The shark reared its head up, blood raining freely from its jaw and gills. More bullets punched through its head, ravaging its remaining eye. Chunks of meat erupted from its head as the autocannon continued its bombardment. In moments, the shark's entire face was reduced to minced meat. The captain wasn't taking any chances. The gun continued blasting away, the shark dancing in place as though being zapped by a giant surge of electricity. It took several excruciating moments for Grade to finally cease fire. When that time finally came, there was little to identify the creature as a predator. The snout was unrecognizable. The Bushmaster had acted as a giant blender, leaving behind a giant heap of shredded flesh and cartilage which looked as mushy as wet newspaper. The lower jaw hung slack, held intact only by a few strands of flesh. Almost all the teeth had been knocked free. By the time its head smacked into the water, the Megalodon was dead. Chopper 4, this is the captain. Confirmed target is dead. Chopper 4 confirmed, sir. Target is... Cordell gazed at the body as it drifted in the blood-filled waves before sinking. Yeah, it's dead. It's deader than dead. Excellent job, everybody, the captain said. Boat 44 move in on the wreckage and see if there are any survivors. We'll be notifying the island police. Both Cordell and Evans breathed a collective sigh of relief. Finally, the former said. Think we're going to get interviewed by the press? Evans asked. Not so much by the press, but by the brass over in Mayport. They're going to want an explanation as to why this went so wrong, Cordell said. He covered his microphone to make absolutely sure that his words weren't accidentally being broadcasted across the Omega Fury's frequency. Grade's not going to have a good day. No, I don't think so, Evans said. What do you think, Brian? Ensign Craig Bryan didn't hear the question. He stared down at the water, an embittered man watching his trophy's lifeless corpse sink beyond view. A kill that nearly was his, that rightfully should have been his. Instead, Captain Grade would receive credit for killing the fish. Bryan's role would be reduced to a footnote in the report, the evidence of his marksmanship destroyed by the Bushmaster. Brian, everything all right back there? The sniper continued watching the red froth. Just dandy. Chapter 33. Bernie Jackson was ready to call it a night. He had been on the job for over 13 hours and was barely keeping his eyes open. It wasn't the longest shift he had ever worked, but it was by far the busiest. Double shifts usually entailed the typical patrolling, disorderly conducts, kicking people out of bars and getting guests quiet in hotels. Not settling near riots after nearly getting killed by a supposedly extinct shark. Each of the public beaches were patrolled by at least 6 county deputies and state troopers. Same with the docks. Nobody was allowed on the water, including the police themselves, unless someone left the island on a boat. There was a question of whether anyone would bother chasing after anyone who departed. By now, the footage was all over the internet. Nobody in their right mind wanted to be anywhere near the water, knowing that the predator lurking below had a head like a battering ram. The last hour had been spent at a tiki bar in the west side. Earlier, a few traumatized people had gotten themselves drunk. Booze and shock didn't mix well, and in this case, it led to them getting aggressive with other patrons. Prior to that, he and Carly had to assist in breaking up a fight at a hotel bar on 7th Street. Working an evening filled with altercation after altercation, Rennie felt as though the public was trying to up the casualty rates. Confident that things were settling down, Rennie returned to the station. As usual, Carly hitched a ride with him. During the night, they had to endure a few remarks from assisting officers telling them how cute they looked together. Most of them were flabbergasted to learn they were married to other people. Naturally, that led to speculation that they were hooking up in secret. Nothing of the sort was explicitly said, but Rennie and Carly knew the human condition. Gossip was like a cancer on the human mind, and it metastasized very quickly. Rennie got out of the patrol car and stretched. "Oh man, normally I'd ask if you wanted to go out for a drink, but considering the company we'd keep..." "Right? Though a shot of whiskey does sound appealing," she said. They entered the station through the back. There were a couple of officers in the briefing lobby taking a breather from monitoring the jail. Both of them were already exhausted and miserable. To make matters worse, they were midnighters called to work afternoons. The misery was only just starting for them. "How are the prisoners?" Carly said. "Oh," one exclaimed. "Whole place smells like barf. Most of these idiots have filled themselves to the eyeballs with beer, and now they're paying the price." Rennie patted him on the shoulder. "Get used to it. There's bound to be more while everyone's crammed on this island." The other officer stood up and went for the coffee pot. "Actually, you might be wrong. Didn't you hear?" "Hear what?" Both officers glared at them. "Your radio's not on?" the first one said. "Switched them off when we left Ramos' Tiki Bar," Rennie said. "I'm ready to go home. Didn't want a call coming in to draw me back to town." "What's the news?" Carly said. "The Coast Guard just radioed in," the officer with the mug said. "They killed the Megalodon. They're sending divers down to retrieve the body." "We've been ordered to sound the all clear," the other said. "People can take their boats back to the mainland now. No more fuss. More importantly, no more drunken brawls." Rennie put a hand over his heart. Thank God. I was ready for this shit to be over before it even started. "Any word from the chief?" The midnighters shook their heads. "Nothing. Dispatch has been trying to get a hold of him, but he hasn't been responding." Rennie and Carly looked at one another. Nico never ignored calls from the office. He always made it clear he was available 24/7. It was part of his role as chief. With his professionalism, there was no way he'd ignore a call from the Coast Guard. Both of them walked through the hallway which led to the dispatch office. Susie was standing up and gathering her belongings. Like them, she had worked about 14 hours and was ready to head home. "Has Nico gotten back with you?" Rennie said. Susie shook her head. "I tried his cell, I tried his radio, I don't know what's going on, but he hasn't replied." Her tone expressed the same concern they felt. "You know where he lives, right?" "I do," Rennie said. "It's not for me to ask, but would you consider checking in on him? He hasn't responded in the last hour or so, and I'm feeling a little nervous." "Yeah, we'll do that," Carly said. She looked at Rennie. "You're driving." "When is it ever your turn?" he replied. The first and most obvious clue that Nico wasn't home was the absence of his truck. The lights were out and the porch light was on. Still, just so he could say he tried, Rennie knocked on the door. No answer. "Okay, this is getting weirder," Carly said. "Where could he be?" "He could be anywhere. It's not like the guy doesn't have a personal life just because he's chief." "Give me a break," Carly said. "You know just as well as I do that he wouldn't ignore dispatch, especially not the guard." Rennie dug out his smartphone. "Fine, I'll try his cell." "Dispatch said they already tried," Carly said. "Maybe he'll answer if he sees my contact name." "Yeah? What does he have you listed under? Dipshit?" "Oh, you're hilarious." Rennie held the phone to his ear and listened to the ringtone. 10 seconds later, it went to voicemail. Damn, he's not picking up. Carly shrugged. Maybe he saw your name and thought, hell no, I'm definitely not answering this idiot. You're just on a roll today, aren't you? Rennie said. Maybe you should give him a call since you're so worried about him. Carly was already dialing. Her attempt was as futile as Rennie's. The call went to voicemail. Hey, Chief, this is Carly Auburn. Dispatch is trying to get a hold of you. I don't know if you're aware, but the Coast Guard has killed the Megalodon. Call them back, or call Rennie, whichever you prefer. We can't seem to locate you. Hope everything's all right. Bye. She clipped her phone back to her belt. Gosh, where the hell could he be? How should I know? Rennie said. I should be snuggling up on my couch right now. Instead, I'm checking in on my boss. It's like I'm a young secretary trying to advance her career. Carly looked at him with disgust. You know, women do have other methods of getting ahead in life. Sure they do, Rennie said. Doesn't mean some of them don't take shortcuts. Carly went back to her side of the car. I'd text your wife, but since you're sleeping on the couch again, I guess I'll save it for later. Oh, thanks, Rennie said. I guess I ought to invest in memory foam cushions. Makes sleeping on that thing a lot more comfortable. Huh, quit being so dramatic. I'm not dumb. I know she doesn't literally make you sleep on the couch, Carly said. Once in a while she does, Rennie said. No thanks to you. You know me, I'm the relationship guru. I figure a little time spent apart will make you appreciate your time together all the more. Right, relationship guru, Rennie laughed. I guess it makes sense. Hell, you were even trying to get the chief to hook back up with his ex. I think they're good together. Right, you're just a hopeless romantic. Carly slammed her door shut and crossed her arms over the car frame. I beg your pardon? I happen to remember you agreeing with me. I was just trying to help the chief get a little, He winked. As he predicted, Carly gave him a scolding look. Hey, you can't blame me. For all I know, he's probably over at her boat wetting his whistle, if you know what I mean. I always know what you mean. I'm sure. She stared off into the distance. A light bulb switched on in her mind. Hey, if you prefer, there's other naughty nautical phrases. Sticking his oar in the water, or maybe making a deep dive? The manta ray. Manta ray. Sorry, I'm not quite catching on to the phrase. They just glide through the Oh, gliding. Maybe you mean the chief is gliding in his familiar... A pebble struck him in the forehead. Ow! Serves you right, idiot. No, I'm referring to Dr. Rada's boat. Rennie rubbed his brow. How the hell was I supposed to know? Probably because we were there when she arrived yesterday. Do you not pay attention to anything except sunbathers on the beach? Yes, but only because you make me. You think he's over there? Rennie asked. It's worth a look. Let's go check. Yeah, I'm not one to walk in on the chief while he's in the middle of... Will you shut up and drive? Rennie groaned as he sank into the driver's seat. If he sees us and gets pissed off, the official story is that you made us go over there. Fine, not like you don't take blame for everything else anyway, Carly said. Listen, if his truck is there, we can assume he's spending time with the doctor. Why can't you just say banging? Rennie said. Because I'm not a 15-year-old boy. Anyhow, if he's there, then we'll leave him alone, not like we won't see him in the morning. And if he's not there, then there's cause for concern. Chapter 34. The air smelled different when Denise returned to the deck. Before, it consisted of the typical salty ocean mist. Now, there was a hint of staleness, metal, and gunpowder. Maybe it was just her state of mind altering her senses. A numbness had crept over her after seeing Cameron die in front of her. His body had been removed. Nico was seated once again, held at gunpoint by both Thatcher and Allen. Finally, I was starting to think you were having a special date down there, the former said. Denise nearly shuddered. Of course, changing clothes took forever. No woman wanted to strip down in front of a piece of garbage like Chris Hebron. The initial hesitation was out of concern regarding his ability to restrain himself. The fact that he openly stated that nothing like that would happen to her meant nothing to Denise. He was still a violent thug who gave in to his impulses. To her relief, such a thing didn't occur while she changed into her diving gear. What would happen after she completed the task and they no longer needed her was unclear. Nico stood up when he saw her. You all right, Denise? Thatcher pushed him back. Nico stood firm, his feet seemingly locked to the deck. I'd back down if I were you, unless you'd like to end up like your pudgy friend. Dude, just shut up, Nico said. He walked past him toward Denise. Hey, stop right there. If you're going to shoot me, just do it, Nico said. Part of him wished he would. Without any hostages to use as leverage, Denise could easily escape while supposedly diving for the merchandise. As a matter of fact, she could do that anyway. She would require convincing, but it was a doable option. She could swim underwater, undetectable by the thugs, and make her way back to the island. It would be a strenuous journey, but a worthwhile one made possible by the air canister. "That's close enough," Chris said. "I'm checking on her." Nico turned to show his bound wrists. "Exactly what are you so concerned about?" Chris looked at the duct tape numbing the chief's wrists. Satisfied there were no tricks up his sleeve, he waved a hand toward Denise. "Hurry up with your reunion. We've got work to do." Nico didn't wait for permission. It was awkward to comfort her with his hands behind his back. Normally he'd offer a hug. To his surprise, it was Denise who embraced him. She wrapped her arms tight around his shoulders and held him close. A few tears slipped out and wet his collar. "I'm afraid they're going to kill you," she said. "They won't," he said loudly. His next statement was spoken in a whisper. "When you dive, don't worry about me. Just get the hell out of here. Swim for the island, stay underwater so they can't see you." "I'm not leaving you," she whispered back. Now Chris was getting suspicious. "Let's hurry it up, kiddos. Bell's about to ring. Better get to your assignment." Denise saw him approach. She had maybe 5 seconds before she'd be yanked away. "I'm not leaving. Don't ask me to. They'll kill us both. If I can at least save you, that'd be worth something." "Maybe it's time someone saved you," Denise said. Chris pulled her by the arm. "All right, get to work." "Okay, fine. Give me a sec. I need to get my light ready. I'm not going to be able to see shit down there." "You have any underwater flares?" Nico asked. "I do?" "Oh no. Nice try," Chris said. "What?" Nico said. "Don't play stupid like we're going to give you guys a flare gun that you can—" He placed a finger on his chin as if in thought. "Oh, let's see. Use to shoot at us?" "Or signal the Coast Guard," Thatcher said. "The Coast Guard's on the other side of the island," Denise said. "You don't have to worry about them." "Only for so long," Thatcher said. He held up Nico's police radio. "Thanks to this, we've been able to keep tabs on everything that's been going on. They just reported that they've killed the shark." "Which means you need to hurry the hell up." Chris lightly pushed Denise to the diving ramp. "Hang on," Thatcher said. "Where's the flare gun? Don't make me ask twice." Nico nodded at the pilot house. "Most seafaring crafts keep a flare gun in the cockpit in case of emergencies." Chris looked up, then back at the chief. With him down on the main deck, there was no threat of him obtaining the flare. "Fine. Now sit." Nico gazed at Denise. "Be careful." "I will." "For fuck's sake," Thatcher said. "It's not like there's a giant shark down there that'll gobble you up. Go on. Move." Denise stepped onto the dive deck, positioned her goggles and rebreather in the proper place, then picked up her diver propulsion vehicle. Gently, she lowered herself into the water. Alan began lowering the 2 ropes into the water. At their ends were light sticks glowing bright green, a small lead weight, and a clip for securing the briefcase. "When you secure the cases, give the ropes a tug so we know to pull them up," Chris said. Denise nodded, while resisting the temptation to flip him the bird. Denise began her descent. The first 50 feet was well lit by the sun's rays and the boat's exterior lights. Beyond that, she needed her flashlight to guide the way. It was a dark world, a sharp contrast to the golden one she passed through. She had never scuba dived at night before. Even in daylight, she rarely went this deep without a submersible. It was simply easier to do the work that needed to be done without having to worry about nitrogen narcosis. At 70 feet, she was in pure darkness. The reach of her flashlight ended 140 feet down, where the seafloor waited. If there was any good fortune, it was the fact that there wasn't any coral or batches of seaweed in this area. Fewer places for the briefcases to hide. Still, it'd be a long and tedious search that would test her spirits, as well as the patience of the drug dealers above. Chapter 35. "Okay, Houston, we have a problem." Carly swallowed. "Yes, I am inclined to agree." How could she not? She was looking at an empty dock where the manta ray had previously been moored. It would have been possible they were at the wrong dock or that Denise had moved it somewhere else had it not been for the presence of Nico's truck parked nearby. He was gone, as was the boat, at a time when no boats were allowed to leave and they needed him most. "I'm not going to state the obvious and say something's off about this," Rennie said. Once again, Carly was inclined to agree. "I don't get it. Why would they take off? Maybe the chief said, to hell with this, I'm out of here. You know he wouldn't do that. Rennie raised his hands in terms of surrender. Hey, I'm just reading the terrain. It's not like him to not answer his radio or cell phone either. And his old lady's boat is gone, with him aboard by the looks of it. You think they could have left to meet with the Coast Guard? Carly asked. Rennie shook his head. Doesn't explain why he won't answer the radio. And he would have said something to dispatch. Good point, Carly said. What should we do? Drive around? Drive where? Rennie said. This is our only clue to his whereabouts. He could be anywhere on the island. Unit 9 to Cielo Nublado dispatch. It was one of the county deputies. This is dispatch, go ahead. We're on the west side of the island. We got flagged down by a resident who claims someone illegally docked their boat at his pier. We did a quick inspection and we think this is the boat used by the bank robbery suspects. Unit 9, was this a cruiser, 32-footer? Rennie said. Affirmative. Stand by, I'm heading over there. 2 other squad cars were already at the scene by the time Rennie and Carly arrived. Every officer, rightfully so, had a hand resting on their sidearm. Some stood near their vehicles with rifles in hand. The gang's reputation preceded them. The state and county had been given instructions to shoot on sight unless the suspects immediately surrendered. At first glance, Carly recognized the cruiser. There was no doubt it was the one she had in her crosshairs earlier that day. If it wasn't clear enough already, the sight of bullet holes along its hull would have erased any doubt. Rennie approached the deputy on scene. Hi, give me the scoop. We were patrolling around this street. Long story short, the homeowner here came out and flagged us down. Told us some punk parked his boat on his property. He had assumed it was some tourist or something like that. He didn't realize the thing was riddled with bullet holes. When we went to investigate, well, it was easy to put 2 and 2 together. It sucks that we have to deal with that shark. Now we have to worry about these assholes running loose on the island, another deputy said. What about the property they were hiding out in? Has anyone checked that? We've had officers stationed there since the attack, Rennie said. Found some of the money they stole and some weapons. I have a feeling those guys, though sloppy, are smart enough not to return there. It looks to me like they had no choice but to return to the island, Carly said. Some of those bullet holes looked like they might have hit the engine. I think so too, the first deputy said. He looked at the night sky as though resenting it. Such is our luck that this guy worked late. Otherwise, we would have found this thing while it was still daylight. With the cover of darkness, it'll be harder to track the suspects down. We can't let them run loose, that's for damn sure, another officer said. They could kill someone else or take them hostage. That's assuming they're hiding out at all. You'd think somebody might have seen them, the deputy said. They could have taken a boat and fled this island for all we know. The pieces came together. The chief not responding, the manta ray being gone, these criminals nowhere to be found. The 2 partners didn't bother strapping themselves in before speeding off, leaving the deputies confused. Oh my God, Carly said. You think those guys hijacked Denise's boat? Everything's pointing at that possibility, Rennie said. Where do we look? They could be anywhere, Carly said. Going back to the mainland would be suicide, Rennie said. Same with the Keys. If they went west, they would have been intercepted by the Coast Guard. Unless they were going southeast. Making a run to the Bahamas? Does that make sense? How could they do that with no money? Unless they planned on making a little ATM stop along the way. Where the plane went down? Be hard to flee the country without funds. The chief clocked out at 7:45, so we know they haven't gone too far. Rennie took a right at the next intersection and sped for the police airfield. To find them quick, we'll need a bird's-eye view. Chapter 36. Denise was happy she didn't sneak in a glass of wine during the afternoon. Right now, as she swam along the ocean floor, she felt as though she had taken 3 drinks on an empty stomach. She was grateful for the diver propulsion vehicle, as relying solely on her own physical strength to get around would be nearly impossible. She was already winded from the day's events, especially Cameron's death. Whenever she panned her light, she feared that she'd come across his corpse. She heard the splash while she was getting changed. Something about that cemented the reality that he was dead, and that she and Nico were next. There was no use for them once the task was complete. The thugs would just see them as loose ends, witnesses to a violent crime. Worse, they considered Nico and her to be partly responsible for the merchandise being lost. In their eyes, she deserved the hell she was being put through. Roughly 36 hours ago, she thought the worst thing that would come from visiting Cielo Nublado would be interacting with her ex. Had somebody told her that would be the best aspect of this trip by far, she would have told that person to screw off. Flash forward to 9:20 on a Friday night, and here she was looking for cocaine of all things. She thought of Nico as she traveled the depths. Were the bastards leaving him alone, or were they beating him senseless? In the middle of these thoughts, she realized that her concern was focused entirely on his well-being rather than her own, just like his was for hers. If any good came from this madness, if there was any light to be found in this darkness, it was that they found each other again. Now, if they could get out of this predicament alive, that would be great. A rush of water stirred her focus. Movement, to her right. She panned her light but saw nothing but rock. Denise froze. Every shape she saw made her heart flutter. Each one was just a rock. Each one had a different size and shape. Bent, round. They all added to the tension. A rush of water like that was only caused by movement, not the current, not a vent, as there were none down here. Only a mass passing by could do that. She considered that whatever it was, it could have been a whale. An orca passing by could have caused such a rush. The mental gymnastics did little to settle her nerves. The Megalodon is dead. It was said over the radio. Nico confirmed it. Such a fact meant nothing. Denise became hyper-aware of the yellow light piercing the darkness. The only light down here. In the world of deep-sea predators, she was practically ringing the dinner bell. The fact that the shark was confirmed dead meant little to her fragile psyche. Something had moved near her. Whatever it was big. To generate a gust of water that strong, it had to be. She switched her light off and turned off her vehicle. Darkness consumed her. Silence surrounded her. It did little to make her feel safer. If anything, it led her mind to darker places. Was this what death looked like? Was it just a dark void with perpetual silence? It wasn't completely silent. There was the natural sound of the current. It wasn't overwhelming, though she could feel herself starting to drift forward. Give it enough time and it would carry her away. Nico would like that. He'd think she followed his instructions and swam for the island. Not an option. Not leaving him to be murdered by those savages up there. There had to be a way to overcome the gang. Outsmarting them wasn't the biggest issue. It was a matter of brute force. They had the guns and the will to use them. She would have to catch them off guard, but how? Stalling down here wasn't going to do her any good. The longer she took, the more impatient Thatcher would get. Waiting in the dark, Denise didn't feel any more strange water distortions. She was now at the point that the darkness was more terrifying than what she feared was out there. She counted to 5, summoned her courage, and switched the light back on. Directly ahead of her was a massive shape, facing her like the head of a submarine. Below the nose was a massive opening lined with jagged teeth. Air bubbles burst from her mouth as she screamed. She threw herself back, dropping the diver propulsion vehicle. This was it. This was the end. The Megalodon was not dead. It was coming right at her. Her instinct was right all along. Outswimming a creature like this was futile. She threw her arms over her eyes and braced for the inevitable, which never came. It took about 2 minutes for her to finally uncover her eyes. She winced once again at the gaping jaw. The light beam pointed at an upward angle, lighting the entire head of the unmoving predator. There were no eyes, nor were there fins. In fact, there wasn't even a dorsal fin. In fact, there was nothing beyond the broken head of the beast. Denise looked back to the snout and jaw. Reality dawned on her. She was looking at the cockpit from the front half of Roberto Rosing's seaplane. It was upside down, the jaw simply being the busted windshield lined with jagged shards of glass. Fuck. She fixed her mouthpiece and collected the propulsion vehicle. Panning her light to the plane, she couldn't help but laugh internally. Not that this situation was funny, but the relief helped to calm her nerves. She moved around the cockpit and panned the light behind it. About 200 feet back, a little to the right, was the tail and fuselage. The wings had broken off during the descent and were scattered a couple dozen yards in each direction. Now came a new anxiety. Either the briefcases were going to be inside the wreckage, or they were scattered somewhere along the ocean bottom. Should the latter be the case, they'd be near impossible to find in the dark. Most of the fuselage was intact in the back half. Denise let the vehicle pull her closer, slowing it to a stop as she arrived at the severed end of the fuselage. Denise was a researcher and explorer. Most of the wrecks she had visited were a century old at minimum. She never dreamed that she'd be visiting the wreckage of a craft whose sinking she personally had the displeasure of witnessing. Seeing the husk of the plane was foreboding in its own. She feared going inside, unsure if she could handle the sight of a crew member's bloated corpse. Then she remembered the Megalodon ate them all. In she went. Rocks and pieces of ceiling layered the bottom. Like the cockpit, the tail was outside down. The seats above her were like stalactites hanging from the ceiling of a cave. The light found something lying on the floor. It was one of the submachine guns from the drug dealer's henchman. She moved on past it. Nothing. No briefcases. No supplies. Nothing. She slammed a fist against the wall. Suddenly she wished that the cockpit of the plane was in fact a Megalodon barreling toward her. She was dead either way. Thatcher and Chris were not going to accept that the briefcases couldn't be found. She would be spending her entire night down here. Then there was the fact that it would take a while to ascend properly. Denise turned around and panned her light in the direction of the plane's front half. There was a bit of the fuselage intact with that portion, though the fact was that she was standing in the main passenger section. It was unlikely that the package was there. She looked down at the gun. It and the magazines were far back, as though they had been swept by the inflow of water. Looking back at the cockpit, she wondered if such a thing could have happened with the briefcases. Might as well check. Not like I won't be here all night anyway. As Denise crossed the ocean floor, she did her best not to look too far into the distance. The last thing she wanted to see were the sunken police boats that were scattered around the area. Those were actually piloted by good people with families and ethics, unlike the scum that were on this plane. Between the two halves were shards of hull and metal. No signs of the briefcases, unfortunately. A fish darted in front of her light, startling her. She batted it away as she would a mosquito. At least it wasn't anything bigger. The temptation to hesitate struck as she neared the forward half of the plane. If those briefcases weren't in there, she would probably suffer a mental breakdown. On the other hand, if they were in there, that only meant death was coming much swifter. One could only take so much anxiety before completely losing her mind or simply growing tired of it. In Denise's case, she was sick of it. She arrived at the cockpit and beamed her light inside. There were rocks, crabs, metal shards, glass, and a couple of handguns which had been swept to the cockpit door. Something metal and square-shaped caught her attention. Her blood rushed, stirring the unlikely hope. She had to brush away pieces of seat cushions, floor and ceiling tile, and other wreckage to uncover the item. Denise couldn't believe it. Both briefcases were right there in front of her, sealed and intact. An odd mix of joy and dread washed upon her. She was happy that she was no longer doomed to lurk in these dark waters, but now this meant she had to face whatever future awaited her up above. Thatcher was determined to have a little fun before disposing of her, and Denise wasn't convinced Chris would stop him once they had what they needed. She knelt by the handguns. Living in Texas, she had more than enough experience handling firearms. However, these had been under the water for many hours. The powder was probably wet by now. Doom and gloom took hold. If only she could go up into the pilot house of her boat and get that flare gun. If she had to pick any of those assholes to burn, it'd be Thatcher, but there was no way she'd get to it. Yet, her mind wouldn't abandon the idea. Nico's voice filled her memory. Most seafaring crafts keep a flare gun in the cockpit in case of emergencies. Seafaring crafts. Boats. And planes. Son of a bitch. He wasn't talking to Chris when he said that. He was talking to me, protecting me in any way he could. As she thought earlier, outwitting the thugs was their only chance. Denise went into the cockpit and dug around. With a little effort, she located a little metal box containing the flare gun. Finally, she had a weapon. Better yet, she had the nerve to use it. There were 2 cartridges. She removed the gun from the case and loaded one cartridge into the pipe, then tucked it under her air tank harness. Holding on to the other as best she could, she exited the aircraft. The next step was to relocate the ropes, which was nearly as strenuous as finding the aircraft itself. To her relief, the light sticks secured at the ends continued to shine, making them easy to spot. She secured the ends of the briefcases to the ropes and prepared to give them a sharp tug, only to stop at the last moment. No. Let's make them wait. Give them something to focus on while I secretly line up a shot. She smiled mischievously and began the long ascent to the surface. Chapter 37. The atmosphere up on deck was getting tense. Nico, seated against the starboard gunwale, watched the drug-addicted Thatcher pacing back and forth. The shakes were getting to him. Despite the cool breeze and lower nighttime temperatures, he was starting to sweat profusely. His two companions were getting nervous. A man with a drug problem and a pistol in his hand didn't make for good company. There was no doubt that Thatcher's insides were churning right now. His brain craved cocaine, and his blood was scouring his body looking for any trace of the substance. Repeatedly, Nico envisioned a plan of attack against the three killers. Originally, he thought of going after Alan Lowe, as he was the smallest and most timid of the bunch. He'd probably be the easiest to overpower quickly. Now, he was considering going after Thatcher first. The guy was practically falling apart, which provided both advantages and disadvantages. Being shaky and relatively weak, he probably wouldn't be able to outmuscle Nico should he wrestle him for the pistol. The downside was his addiction was visibly worsening his temper, thus giving him an even more itchy trigger finger. 3 times since Denise went into the water did Thatcher threaten to shoot Nico if he even looked at him funny. Chris was carefully watching the water, particularly the 2 ropes that Denise was instructed to tie the briefcases to. He thought he noticed some light movement 40 minutes ago, but nothing since. It wasn't the hard yank that Denise was instructed to perform once the packages were secure. "What the hell's taking the bitch so long?" Thatcher said. "It's dark down there. Give her time to look," Chris said. That almost made Nico want to chuckle. In a way, Chris was almost more psychotic than Thatcher. At least he was up front with his madness. Chris, on the other hand, seemed to dart back and forth between reasonable and completely insane. Nico kept quiet. No need to stir the pot just yet. Equally as important was to keep still. More specifically, maintain the illusion that he was keeping still. Slowly but truly, he slid his wrists back and forth, working the duct tape against the head of a screw. Never ever would he criticize Denise on the maintenance of her boat again. He couldn't scratch the tape heavily without making it obvious what he was doing. Slow, gradual movements, as though he was simply trying to stretch his arms. "You know what happens after she's done," Thatcher said. His commanding tone was lost under a couple of sniffles. Chris didn't even pay him a glance. "Yes, we take off for the Bahamas, then figure out a plan from there." "I meant with the scientist lady. It's been a while since I've gotten a little coos." That almost made Nico spring to action. The prick was such a lowlife he spoke of raping as though it was nothing more than a leisurely activity. Even Alan Lowe looked uncomfortable. There were some lines that even murderers wouldn't cross. The criminal mind was a complicated one. The standards they kept often contradicted each other. Each offender had his own particular line he or she wouldn't cross. Unless you were Ed Thatcher. Then there was no such thing as a line. Now, Chris looked over at him, then back at Nico. At first, he seemed worried of their hostage overhearing this conversation. His posture shifted with a nonchalant shrug as though to say, "Who cares? There's nothing you can do about it anyway." "You sure you can even make it work? I see the way you're shaking." Thatcher pushed his shoulder. "Damn right I can make it work. I'll whip it out right now and give it a go if you'd like." Chris winced. "No thanks." He turned his frowning face back to the water. "Do what you want with her, just don't make it too noisy." The way he spoke, he didn't seem thrilled at the idea, but figured if it would mellow Thatcher out, it was worth it. Thatcher smiled, then to showboat, he turned to Nico and batted his eyebrows. "Yeah, you heard that right. What you gonna do about it?" Nico looked away, playing the part of the defeated man awaiting certain death. Meanwhile, he continued scraping that duct tape against that screw. He felt the edge of the bindings with his finger. He had created a tear. Perfect. Hardest part was over. Just gotta keep working at it. "I see light," Chris said. Thatcher and Alan both hurried to the starboard side. "Yep, she's coming up," Alan said. "But she never gave us the signal," Thatcher said. "That bitch seriously thinks she can come up without our shit." "Would you just chill for a damn minute?" Chris balled his fist, desperately wanting to deck his partner in the jaw. With them facing the opposite direction, Nico could work on the tape with a little more force. He scraped the screw head back and forth, feeling the tear gradually widening. Almost there. Now at the fuck it stage, Nico pulled his arms apart with all his might, gritting his teeth. The tape stretched, the tear now forming a perfect triangle whose tip was working its way across its gray width. Finally, it gave. Nico's hands nearly flew to his sides. Had the thugs been facing him, they would have instantly realized what had occurred. For once, the greed of money and narcotics served a positive purpose, even if unknowingly so. He adjusted himself to rest on his knees, making the inevitable spring to action easier. He kept his hands tucked behind his back to maintain the impression that they were still taped together. "What's the holdup?" Thatcher said. "It's like she's just sitting there. It doesn't look like she's more than 15 feet down." "She said something about safety stops," Alan said. "Fuck!" Thatcher spun on his feet, then paced along the length of the deck. "Here she comes," Chris said. Thatcher was quick to return to the side, his hand tapping restlessly on the gunwale as he awaited Denise's arrival. The trip to the surface had been a strenuous one. Denise was still feeling the effects of nitrogen narcosis, and the few safety stops she rushed added to the lightheadedness. It wasn't anything she couldn't handle. She had her bearings, and more importantly, a focus on what she was about to do. She yanked her goggles off as she surfaced and spat her rebreather out. Already the 3 pieces of garbage in human form were staring down at her. "What's the story, lady?" Chris said. "Where's our shit?" Thatcher shouted. It received another look from his partner. "Where's Nico?" she said. "You'll get pieces of him if you don't speak up," Thatcher said. "I'm not telling you anything until I know he's safe." "I'm all right," Nico called from across the deck. "How about you?" "I'm good." "Whether both of you will stay that way will depend," Chris muttered. "Where are the briefcases?" "Didn't you feel the rope tug?" she said. "Bitch, you never tugged the rope," Thatcher said. "Sure I did," she lied. "Just pull the ropes up. You'll see for yourself." Thatcher had no plans to waste time calling her bluff. He went for the ropes and began pulling them in. He could feel some weight at each end. "Got something. Maybe she wasn't flubbing after all." The others gathered by him. Just by how taut the ropes were, there was no doubt the briefcases were attached. "All right," Chris said to Denise. "Climb aboard." She noticed the little grin that appeared on Thatcher's face simultaneous to that instruction. Her intuition screamed that the particular happiness he felt in this moment had nothing to do with the drugs and cash. Alan Lowe's nervous glance at him only reinforced her suspicions. Denise kept everything below the neck submerged. Her light was flashed off, preventing the orange color of the flare gun from coming into view. She proceeded toward the dive deck, only to stop as the briefcases were yanked from the water like a pair of trout. "Yes!" Thatcher hauled the precious cargo aboard, dropped them onto the deck, and opened them. The cocaine and cash were intact and unharmed by the water. "For once, something actually worked out in our favor," Alan said. "Damn straight," Thatcher said. He dug a knife from his pocket and opened up one of the cocaine bags. "Oh, Jesus, already?" Chris said. "Fuck off," Thatcher said. He snorted a gram of the stuff and looked to the heavens. His face had a weird sexual look to it, which made sense considering something else that was on his mind. Denise inched toward the dive deck, tossed her flippers aboard, then began to remove her harness. First, and more importantly, she tucked the flare gun between her knees, keeping it from view until she got the tank off her back. Clinging to the deck with one arm, she unclipped the harness and tossed it up. Slowly, she pulled herself aboard. Peeking over the transom door, she saw that the thugs were preoccupied with their money and drugs. Chris and Alan stepped toward the structure, looking over the cash in the briefcase. Thatcher, meanwhile, remained in his orgasmic state of cocaine bliss. He took another bump, moaned pleasurably, then looked over at her. He licked his lips. "Hey, darling, you're looking good with your hair all wet like that." Denise tucked the pistol behind her back. Her eyes went to Nico, who was on his knees watching her. He gave a slight nod. He knew. She returned a smile, surprising Thatcher. "Nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." He closed the briefcase and stood up. "How about you and me head down below for a little fiesta? I have something you'd be very interested in." "Yeah? You sound pretty confident about that." "Damn right I am. I got something hot waiting for you." "Yeah?" She leaned forward, her smile revealing white teeth. "Maybe it's I who have something hot waiting for you." Thatcher perked up. His eyebrows were practically on top of his head. Oh, really? He eyed her figure, mentally picturing her without the suit. His eyes lingered low to her pelvis. Something hot, huh? Red hot. Denise pointed the flare gun and squeezed the trigger. A sizzling ball of fire struck Thatcher in the chest. Pain and panic struck at once. He staggered back, screaming, batting the fire with his hands, succeeded in singeing them as well. Chris and Alan spun back and saw their partner dancing with a ball of fire attached to his shirt. What they didn't see, until it was too late, was Nico springing to action. Chris was hit with a kick to the chest which drove him backward. The chief focused his attention on Alan, hitting him with a haymaker to the jaw, then grabbing for his submachine gun. The thug held on as best he could but could not outmuscle his attacker. Fueled by rage and determination, Nico hit him in the jaw a second time, then put him in a haymaker. Alan gagged, feeling his airway closing. The curtains of sleep were threatening to come over his eyes. Desperate and disoriented, he squeezed the trigger, spraying bullets across the deck. Chris, who was back on his feet and ready to resume the fight, ducked for cover as the deck splintered around his feet. As the men struggled, the muzzle went high, sending bullets into the back of the pilot house before it ran empty. Realizing Chris would be firing his pistol any second now, Nico released his chokehold, spun Alan to face him, then knocked him on his back with a punch to the nose. Before the gunman even touched the deck, Nico was already sprinting for the other. He caught Chris mid-draw, grabbing his wrist and twisting it to the side beyond its flexibility. Chris let out a call as his fingers failed to maintain their grip on the weapon. An elbow to the nose jerked his head backward. Blood splattered the aft window they fought alongside. Chris yelled, pissed off from both the attack and his inability to overpower Nico. As the chief had predicted after the ambush earlier that evening, had he been prepared for them, they would have all been laying out on the deck, just as Alan was now, and how Chris was about to be. He released his grip on Chris's wrist, only to clutch him by the head. He raised a knee into the thug's midsection, weakening his stance. With all his might, he pulled his head downward, then raised his knee a second time. It struck Chris right in the nose, doubling the free flow of blood that was already spilling. An uppercut to the face knocked the criminal on his back. Chris floundered, furious at Nico for besting him, and at himself for letting it happen. He was halfway to his feet when a kick to his face returned him to the deck. Now, all he saw were stars, both the literal ones above and the metaphorical ones when one was on the brink of losing consciousness. To his left, Nico saw Alan rolling onto his hands and knees. His right hand slithered near the Glock holstered on his hip. The guy was coughing, half-conscious, with barely enough of his wits intact to continue the fight. Nico charged him, pinning his wrist with one hand and grabbing him by the collar with the other. He forced Alan back and slammed him against the gunwale. An elbow connected with his enemy's nose, stunning him once again. Nico wasn't done. This was self-preservation and revenge all in one. He grabbed a fistful of the criminal's hair and spun him to face the sea, clunking the spotlight with his shoulder. Crack! Again and again, Nico slammed Alan's head onto the gunwale like a gavel. Teeth rattled around his boots, setting in the pool of blood which spilled from Alan's mouth. Nico pulled back on his head for the umpteenth time, ready to smash it down again. By now, Alan was practically a rag doll. His front teeth were missing, his nose flattened, his face bloodied. Despite this, Nico wasn't done. He was ready to continue the punishment. He reared Alan's head back like a football and was midway through the next smash when he froze. His eyes steadied on the sea, where the spotlight was shining outward. Something was out there. At first glance, it looked like a distant sail, then a metal cleaver. As it entered the light, he noticed it had the color of metal. But what really caught his attention was the 80-foot mass it was attached to. It was coming right for them. No. No way. The Coast Guard killed it. They confirmed it. It took several seconds of panicked flailing about for Thatcher to finally get the idea to tear off his shirt and throw it overboard. The ball of flame sizzled along the ocean surface and sank, shrinking as it died out. Thatcher looked down at his chest, charred by third-degree burns which blackened his tattoo of 4 nude women posing on a bed. From what Denise could see, they were holding pistols and what looked like a wad of cash. She was so caught off guard by the violent reaction that she nearly forgot to reload the flare gun. Twice during the ascent, she nearly dropped the second cartridge. Now, more than ever, she was grateful she didn't, because physically besting a drug-fueled raging Thatcher would be impossible at this point. She loaded the fresh cartridge into the flare gun and took aim. Thatcher was already advancing, his eyes as demonic as the women in his tattoo. Bitch, you're gonna wish you didn't do that. I'm gonna tie you down and keep your ass there for days, use you as I please until I feel I've had enough. Then, the next flare hit his groin. Thatcher's anger reverted once again to full-blown panic. His chest burning to a crisp was one thing. His goods, however? No man could tolerate that. And just like with his shirt, the damn flare was clinging to his jeans. Attempting to brush it off only singed his fingers again. He couldn't even get his hands close enough to his belt to take his pants off. There was only one thing his frantic mind could think of. Water. He threw himself into the ocean. Surprisingly, splashing down only triggered more pain. The salt water stung his fresh burns and the flare was still burning. Thatcher floundered along the surface, screaming and cursing, unaware what the red flare was attracting until it was too late. He felt the rush of water, then the reflection of the flare and spotlight on the grayish-white skin, and the 7-inch teeth lining the open jaw. The beast had been moving slowly since its recent feeding. Much energy had been spent, depriving humans of their short little lives and wrecking the inventions that carried them across the sea. Its sea. Its domain. The small injuries near its left gills would take a while to heal, but the bleeding had stopped. The fish would still register pain in the area for at least a week, but pain to a megalodon was a minor inconvenience. There was no comfort in living in the wild. Pain was a reminder of the life that evolution had granted it. As night set in, the beast was ready to feed again. Returning to the hunting grounds where it had found abundant prey at midday, it found itself investigating a phenomenon which reminded it of its original deep environment. Lights. In the world from which it came, lights meant that either prey was nearby or a predator. It didn't matter how small the light. The megalodon had been tricked in the past, lured by little lights which seemingly belonged to a fish no longer than its pectoral fin, only to encounter a tentacled monstrosity. It had won those previous encounters, but suffered scars in the process. So, it waited. Only when the lights were up above, and the fish could identify its target, did the megalodon know it was ready for war. And like an offering, the vessel had dropped one of its occupants overboard. A rapid heart rate, struggling movements, and a flickering red light served as a beacon, drawing the fish to its next meal. Was it a figment of his imagination, or a hallucination from the cocaine intake? In the split second he saw it coming, 1,000,000,000,000 thoughts went through his head. Then the megalodon snatched him out of the water, enclosing him in a world of darkness. Not totally dark. His crotch was still on fire. That's when Thatcher realized this fish was real. He was in its mouth, being swept to the back of its throat. It was swallowing him whole. He passed through a small tunnel, only to stop midway. The flare was singeing the wet walls of the shark's throat. The walls began to contract. The whole body was thrashing about. Thatcher felt as though he was inside a giant bucking bronco. In the blink of an eye, the current which took him to its stomach reversed. Moments later, he was back out into the ocean. The night sky was above him and thrashing water lapping around him. The momentum took him backward. As abruptly as he was regurgitated, his trajectory hit a sudden stop. Cold metal pressed against his back. He was up against the bow of the manta ray. Thatcher looked up at the ship, then ahead at the megalodon. It was in front of him, snapping its jaws above the water. It had never tasted fire before. At this point, there was nothing Thatcher could do but laugh. "Ha ha, you fuck! What's the matter? Haven't tasted medium rare before? Ha ha! The fish swung its body to the left, smacking him with its caudal fin, leaving him pancaked against the hull of the vessel. The red splotch that was previously Ed Thatcher proceeded to drip from the bow as the megalodon circled back for a go at the other human treats waiting on deck. When he saw the fish smash the criminal, Nico wasn't sure whether to be shocked, relieved, or oddly amused. It was as though the megalodon had grown tired of Thatcher's conduct. He settled on shocked when he realized the shark was coming back. "Nico, look out!" Right after his ex-wife's warning came the scraping of metal behind him. He spun on his heel and saw Chris. He was on his hands and knees, spitting blood and a crown as he located his Glock. The muzzle grazed the deck as he lifted it. Looking at him, Nico realized Chris had no idea that the shark was charging, or that Thatcher was dead. The sudden impact against the boat could have been a wave or a dolphin or anything. Hell, the guy was so disoriented he probably didn't even notice in the first place. He pointed the weapon at the chief, pausing long enough for Alan to crawl out of the way. "Gotta give you A for effort, Chief." The gun shook as he started to apply pressure to the trigger. Nico shrugged. "You know the first step to getting a passing grade?" Chris hesitated, briefly debating as to whether he cared enough to hear the punchline before killing the fucker. Nico glanced over his shoulder, then back at him. Not procrastinating. The Megalodon struck the boat, rocking it to starboard. Chris was suddenly on his back, his shots now aimed at the stars instead of the chief. Now he was aware that something was in the water. Then he was lost in another haze as the chief threw himself onto the criminal, battering him with a hail of blows to the face. Alan was back on his feet, though lost in a daze. Blood had smeared over his eyes, making his blurry vision a hellish red. As the boat rocked, the already off-balance criminal stumbled back and forth. As the boat rocked back, he ended up once again at the portside gunwale, peering down at the water. There was an odd hole in the water. A hole lined with teeth, and quickly getting larger. Oh. The Meg closed its jaw over the gunwale, breaking off a whole section as it pulled away. It splashed down, leaving a gaping hole in the side of the manta ray, and the still-standing lower half of Alan Lowe. A piece of spinal column protruded from the severed waist like an antenna. The knees wobbled, then gave out. The remains toppled into the water, where they would soon be collected and reunited with the upper half. Denise fell to her knees as the boat began to spin. She couldn't see the shark at the moment, but it was obvious it would keep hitting the vessel until it was resting alongside the plane. They had a few weapons present, including a couple in the galley, but as she learned in the recent bloodbath, these weapons were not strong enough to penetrate its flesh. The only weak points were the eyes, gills, and mouth. The bloodstream. She recalled the original plan to drug the fish. It was the only chance they had, except instead of dosing the shark with sedative, she would inject it with cyanide. Nico had Chris under control. Right now, she had to deal with the greater threat. She descended into the depths of the manta ray, nearly tumbling down the last few stairs after the shark struck again. This time it hit under the stern. The crunch of metal that echoed through the vessel struck a nerve. Were the propellers knocked loose? Was there a breach? She waited to listen for a potential rush of water. Nothing came. She continued into the lab and found the gun cabinet. If only she could have gotten down here while the gang had seized the boat. She could have hit one or both of them with sedatives, allowing Cameron or Nico to take down the last. At least the criminals didn't learn that this tranquilizer gun was here. Knowing them, they would have discarded it just to prevent her from using it as a weapon. She took the empty darts and the jar of cyanide. There was only enough left to fill 2 darts. Damn it. Will this be enough? She thought back on what it took to put down a 50-foot whale. She recalled it required 2 darts as well, and that was for a creature that was 30 feet smaller and already dying. The shark was going to attack whether she had sufficient amount or not. If nothing else, maybe they could slow it down. She loaded a dart into the gun and ran up the steps. Nico landed another blow. By now, Chris's jaw was crooked with multiple teeth missing. It was like a caricature of old cartoon villains, with crooked jaws containing only a few spaced teeth. Except Chris was a lot bloodier and bruised, deservedly so. Despite all the punishment, despite nearly blacking out twice in the last few minutes, he still clung to that pistol. Nico grabbed his wrist and bent it the same way he did before. This time, however, Chris was prepared for that technique. With no more fists landing on his face, he lunged upward, striking Nico in the throat. Nico coughed and spat, his airway temporarily constricting. No amount of adrenaline could make one prepare for a crippling blow to the throat. All of a sudden, he was now the one on his back. Blood from Chris's mouth trickled onto his face as the thug smiled down on him. The gun wavered between their 2 grasps, Chris slowly using his body weight to tilt it downward toward Nico. Slowly but truly, it neared his head. His fingers squeezed the trigger. Bang! The bullet hit the deck, missing its target, but still inflicting damage. Gunpowder singed the left side of the chief's face, making his ear ring. "If anything good came of this, it's that I'm going to get my full share of the cash," Chris muttered. "Don't worry, Chief. You'll get the bagpipes and the flag and the parades. Maybe not a coffin considering where your corpse is about to go, but we can't all get what we want." Nico sneered at him. No way am I letting this bastard get the best of me. He grabbed a fistful of Chris's hair, pulled him close, and head-butted him in the nose. The impact rang his own noggin, but it also weakened his enemy long enough for Nico to wrestle the gun free. The wrist lock wasn't working this time. Instead, he would rely on good old-fashioned impact to shake things loose. First, a little extra something to get Chris's body weight off of him. Nico made a fist, extended his index foreknuckle like the muzzle of a gun, then jabbed it into Chris's eye. The thug lurched back, yelling in a fit of rage and pain. The chief lunged upward, putting the prick on his back once again, then with both hands slammed Chris's head against the deck. The gun fell loose and slid out of reach. A chop to the throat ended any fight Chris had left in him. Now it was his airway closed. A taste of his own medicine. Nico pulled the thug to his feet. Chris, head slung, only able to stand with the chief's support, started to chuckle as he noticed he was being pulled to the side of the boat. "You serious? You're gonna feed me to the shark? Isn't that a little beneath you, Chief?" "Not really, especially when I'm putting you to good use." Good use. Chris knew what that meant. But having been beaten to a pulp, he didn't have the strength or even the will to resist anymore. He would just have to take satisfaction in knowing that the chief wouldn't be walking out of this predicament either. "The fish'll still come after you after it eats me. You're just delaying the inevitable," Chris chuckled. "You seriously think the fish will have a full stomach after eating me?" Nico looked past him at Denise, who stood behind Chris. She had the tranquilizer rifle in one hand and a spare dart in the other. They shared a nod, a gesture of mutual understanding of what they were going to do. Normally, they would think themselves as horrendous human beings for such an action. But then again, this guy was arguably more of a monster than the 80-foot creature trying to sink their boat. Nico glanced at the shark. It was coming again toward the port side, eyes rolling back to plow into the hull. He turned his eyes to Chris for the final time. "No, but eating tainted meat such as yours, maybe he'll get a little food poisoning." Chris yelped as Denise plunged the dart into his back. Cyanide filled his bloodstream, immediately putting him into cardiac arrest. Breathing became impossible, both due to its effects on his lungs and because of the seawater he was thrown into. The Megalodon slowed, detecting movement in the water. Unlike the last, this one did not contain a burning red light. It was a bite-sized piece of meat ready for the taking. Hungry and burning up energy, its quick digestive system already through with its last victim, the Megalodon snatched Chris and gulped him down whole. Its stomach acid began breaking him down, absorbing his flesh and blood, and any contents inside him. Had there not been a man-eating predator circling them, Nico and Denise would have happily taken this moment to embrace. They had defeated the criminals that killed Cameron and took them hostage. Finally, they were alone. That was also the unfortunate part. They were by themselves, with nobody to help. To make matters worse, the Megalodon wasn't slowing down yet. It did seem uncharacteristically hesitant to attack again. It repeatedly circled their boat, its movements lacking any sign of aggression. "Either it's full or it might not be feeling well," Nico said. He looked at the tranq gun. "How many more of those darts are there?" "Got plenty of darts. Cyanide, however? The dart in this gun has the last. And the odds of that finishing off the fish are slim. Well, we won't know unless we try," Nico said. He looked at the gap in the gunnel where the Megalodon snatched out on low. "And I know exactly how to get the bastard to open wide." He took the tranq gun from her hands, then grabbed Chris's Glock off the deck. He moved to the breach and waited for the shark to make its pass. Meanwhile, Denise went to the galley. There, she found Chris's shotgun, pumped and ready to go. Better yet, she found a couple of spare magazines for the H&K. She returned to the deck, found the submachine gun and loaded it, then stood alongside her husband. Ex-husband, though she didn't think of him as such. "What are you doing?" he said. "Back away. If this works, it's going to come right at us." "Look at yourself, Nico. You're not going to be able to shoot the shark, then switch to the tranq rifle fast enough. Let me draw it in. You stand by with the dart." "Denise." The shark was making its pass. Denise raised the H&K and popped off a few rounds. Nico took the hint. She wasn't backing down. Might as well go with the flow and hope for the best. Denise waited long enough for him to shoulder the tranq gun, then fired a series of short, controlled bursts at the dorsal fin. The fish twitched, its tail bashing the water as though annoyed by the series of stings along its flesh. It turned and went for the boat. The head came partially out of the water, the eyes locking onto the human treats waiting above. No longer was there a question of its willingness to attack. Nico pushed Denise to the side. "Go!" The fish was breathing, jaws parting, serrated teeth dangling ribbons of clothing and flesh. Behind them was the back of its throat, coming right at the chief. He squeezed the trigger and threw himself back as far as he could. The Megalodon hit the boat with a thunderous crack. Its jaws snapped repeatedly at the air, unable to reach the treat. Nico was on his back, staring into the dark tunnel behind those layers of teeth. In the back of its throat was the dart, embedded in the soft flesh. He hit his target. The moment of triumph was just that. A moment. Terror took hold as he realized he was sliding toward those jaws. The boat was teetering, the deck now a wet, slippery slope leading to death. Shit, 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 shit! Don't let those be my last words. More gunshots filled the air. Shotgun blasts this time, delivering tight groups of buckshot into the Megalodon's gill lining. The fish swung its head left to attack the new threat. In doing so, it was betrayed by its own weight. Splintering the gunwale and the deck, it fell back into the water. Denise stumbled to and fro as the boat righted itself. Nico stood back up and looked at her, impressed and thankful. Those skills he taught her never wore off. She pumped the shotgun, astonished at her own quick thinking and marksmanship. "I might not have delivered on the chicken and rice, but—" Nico pulled her close and pressed his lips to hers. Damn shark. He'd prefer to make that kiss last longer, but survival didn't leave much time for romance. Still, it provided a warmness to both of them. Back to business. Nico took the H&K and loaded the final magazine into its frame, while Denise loaded the remaining shells into the shotgun. Together, they watched the shark circle again. It was sluggish, the back-and-forth motions of its tail having a lag. "The drugs are taking effect," Denise said. They felt a vibration under their feet and could hear a deep groan within the vessel. At the same time, they noticed that the deck they stood on wasn't even. It was sloping once again to port, and a little to stern. Nico knelt down and looked at the side of the vessel. The hull was cracked wide open, allowing the ocean to infiltrate the ship. "Well, that plan backfired." "Looks like we need a new plan," Denise said. "Any ideas?" "You sure you don't have any more cyanide?" "Positive." The ship groaned again, then tilted more violently. The water was rushing in fast. "Let's think fast, because ill or not, that shark will happily gobble us down." Nico looked at the deck for anything to use, then settled on the tranquilizer rifle. "What about your sedatives? Would that finish the job?" Denise didn't bother wasting time answering. She ran for the passageway, went below, only to stop midway down. The water was climbing, killing the lights. She'd be traveling blind, searching for the right cabinet and supplies. It wasn't going to happen in the amount of time she could hold her breath. She returned to the deck. "Good plan. Should have come up with it 5 minutes ago." Nico looked at his gun, then at the shark. "Well, unless we grow wings and fly out of here, we're going into the water." "Then we go down fighting," Denise said, raising her shotgun muzzle. "Give the bastard something to remember us by." A hint of a smile came over Nico's face. Despite the dread of impending death, the fact that the love of his life was willing to go down like a badass made it a little better. Easier. Still, he wished there was a way out, if only he had a chopper to fly them out. His imagination made it worse. He swore he could hear the droning sound of a helicopter rotors steadily approaching. "Nico?" He looked at Denise. She was looking to the sky and pointing. Right then, a spotlight embraced them. Nico looked to the source. As though his imagination had materialized into reality, his department helicopter descended from the sky like an angel sent from heaven. God, were you listening? "There they are," Rennie said. "Any sign of the bank robbers?" Carly asked. She was in the fuselage with her sniper rifle in hand. "Not that I can see. In fact, the chief and the missus look like they're packing heat. Doubt they'd be doing that if they were held hostage." As he moved the chopper closer, he noticed the tilt of the boat and the damage to the hull. "Oh, shit." Carly saw it too. "What the hell happened?" She got her answer as a dorsal fin passed through the spotlight. "You've got to be kidding me! I thought the Coast Guard killed that thing!" "I guess they lied," Rennie said. "Oh my God, they're sinking. Ren, hurry, let's get them out of there." "What do you think I'm doing?" "I don't know, probably thinking about girls on the beach." He shrugged. "That does relax me." She reached up and smacked him over the head. Even now, with the chief's life at stake and a killer shark lurking below, he still felt the need to make quips. Rennie got on his microphone. "Hey, Chief, is this a bad time to negotiate a pay raise?" Nico moved around the deck in search of something. After a moment, he found the two-way radio, which had been dropped during a skirmish. "Sure, I'll give half your salary to Carly." "I'm good with that deal. Take us down," Carly said with a thumbs up. She unrolled the stepladder and tossed it out the door. It dangled 20 feet below them, swinging toward the people on the sinking ship. The chief urged the researcher to climb aboard first. She grabbed the first ladder bar and began her ascent, only to drop off and run across the deck. "Go up!" Nico screamed. Carly's reaction was louder. "Holy shit!" The explosion of water beneath them was enough for Rennie to yank on the joystick. The chopper ascended, then stalled for a moment. The ladder went taut, then broke free. The fish had seized it in its jaws. It headbutted the boat in the process, spinning it to starboard, then spat out the inedible ladder. Carly put it in her crosshairs. The left side of its neck had 2 bullet holes from a large-caliber weapon. She had heard the Coast Guard report from earlier that the helicopter sniper had hit it, thus driving it off. No doubt this was the same shark that wreaked havoc on the island earlier. So what did the Coast Guard report killing? Did they think they killed it, only to be mistaken? Later would be the time for questions. First, they needed to get the fish away from the boat. Carly squeezed off several rounds, successfully hitting the fish in the sensitive gill slits. Rennie moved the chopper to the north and lowered it, using themselves as bait as they did before. The plan worked. The shark raced toward them with a vengeance. Cursing, Rennie pulled the chopper up. The shark breached and snapped its jaws. The chopper jolted as its snout bumped against the landing skids. That was too close. Nico and Denise watched as the flight team continued their dance with the predator. The sound of water seeping through the passageway and the ocean climbing along the hull reminded them of their dilemma. "We're taking a swim whether we like it or not," Nico said, "and they don't have enough bullets to kill that thing." "Can they call somebody?" Denise asked. "Won't matter. They won't get here in time." He held the tranquilizer rifle, squeezing the barrel with his fingers as though to strangle it. Just 1 or 2 more doses would have finished the job. It was evident, despite its willingness to fight, that the shark was suffering from cyanide poisoning. Their plan was working, they just needed more of the poison. Water swept the deck, pushing along equipment and wreckage. "If only we had something to drug it with, something that'll put its heart into overdrive," Nico thought out loud. "Like a cocaine overdose?" Denise said. Nico looked at her. She was holding Thatcher's briefcase in hand. Inside were 9 kilos of cocaine. An idea dawned on both of them. "Wow. I'd never thought I'd be happy to see that shit," Nico said. "You think you can mix that with water and get it into some of the tranquilizer darts?" "Yes, but it won't be enough. For a fish this size, it'll take all 9 of these kilos to overdose it. Don't have enough syringes to pull that off." Nico closed the briefcase and hurried to the ladder. As they climbed to the fly deck, the ocean consumed the main deck. "You mind getting that flare pistol out for me?" he asked. As Denise went into the pilot house to find the flare, he raised the radio to his lips to speak with Rennie. "Hey guys, I need a favor." "A favor? Sure. We believe in good customer service. You want a quarter-pounder with your rescue?" After shaking his head and muttering, "Jesus Christ," he responded, "Yes, that'd be great, actually, but first I need you to lure the shark back toward us." "What? You insane, Chief?" "Maybe. It's been a long day. But we're going to drug the damn thing. It's our only chance of killing it. We came over here to save you from the shark, not feed you to it. As tempting as that salary remark makes it. Have faith, Rennie. All right. Just let me know when." Denise returned from the pilot house, flare gun in hand. It was loaded with a fresh cartridge and ready to fire. The ocean consumed the main deck, and like quicksand, it began sucking the rest of the vessel down. Nico looked at Denise. "You ready?" "Yeah. But first," she pulled him in for a kiss, a return for the one he gave her before. After a tender moment, she pulled away. "Just in case I don't get a chance to later." "You will." With the briefcase in one hand and the radio in the other, Nico faced the north. "All right, Rennie. Bring the bastard over here." "Oh, hell." There was no sarcasm there. Despite his reservations, Rennie steered the chopper toward the boat. Carly hit the Meg with a full magazine of rounds, successfully luring it closer. Nico stood ready. The water was almost all the way up to the deck. It would take minimal effort for the Megalodon to get them. To prevent that, Denise was ready with the flare gun, aiming it as though it were a .44 Magnum. The water rippled as a gust of wind passed over it. The chopper passed overhead, putting the boat between it and the shark. The fish moved with heightened interest. There was easier prey directly ahead. Its vision, though compromised by whatever was in its bloodstream, was still able to comprehend the sight of two humans. They were almost at the water level. Easy for a quick bite before resuming its chase. The Megalodon lifted its head over the water. Its jaws parted, its throat widening. Before it reached the ship, something struck the back of its throat. Something small, not made of flesh, but material. Before it could spit it out, it felt extreme heat. Another red ball of flame had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and had struck the roof of its open mouth. The fish reared its head back, swallowing the first item and its contents. Its interest in the humans having faltered, the shark darted to the right and continued to circle the sinking boat. Over the next few moments, it noticed something was happening within its body. Its heart rate, which had mysteriously slowed, had now increased rapidly. The shark's blood was racing. There was no amount of water that could quench its need for oxygenating its bloodstream. All the Megalodon knew was the discomfort that came with drug overdose. That discomfort grew more intense, like magma building under the Earth's crust. Its senses went into overdrive. It could feel every lap of water, smell every blood cell for miles, and see images that it could not comprehend. Its heart, already strained by cyanide, was now overwhelmed by cocaine. It reached a rhythm surpassing the heartbeat rates during the most brutal fights the Meg had ever experienced, and kept going. Finally, as though struck by a bolt of lightning, the valves ruptured. The Megalodon breached, mouth agape, spewing blood. It was dead by the time it hit the water. Chapter 38. Nico gave Denise a boost, allowing her to climb atop the pilot house. Rennie was lowering the chopper. With the ladder gone, they had to do it the hard way, leveling the aircraft with them so they could climb in. Carly reached down, grabbed Denise's hand, and pulled her aboard. The chief pulled himself up onto the pilot house and was ready to be hauled aboard. "Oh man, the chopper's low on fuel. Gotta go, Chief," Rennie called out. He tilted the chopper to port, pretending he was about to take off, then settled it back down. Carly pulled Nico aboard, closed the door, then moved seats across from him. "Want me to slap him again, Chief?" "Absolutely," Nico said. The group shared a laugh. "But after you're done, text his wife again. Suggest she treat him well tonight. Thanks for saving our asses." "Agreed," Denise said. She pulled Nico close for her next chance. That chance lasted several moments, sparking a smile from the sniper sitting across from them. She looked over at Rennie as he elevated the chopper. "Told you I have magic powers." "Huh? Like we discussed yesterday, I sensed they still had feelings for each other." She shook a finger at him. "Women's intuition is never wrong." "Agreed again," Denise said. The chopper turned and started its journey toward the island. As they departed, the 4 occupants watched the body of the Megalodon as it began to sink. It was belly up, jaw slack, motionless. Dead. "Thank God," Carly said. "Might have to brag to the Coast Guard that we actually killed the fish," Rennie said. "Yeah," Carly said. "Were you guys aware of that?" "Yeah. The criminals were monitoring the transmissions through my radio, until they became shark food," Nico said. He watched the water passing beneath them. "Something doesn't make sense. They wouldn't declare it was dead unless they knew for sure." "But it was right there, obviously," Carly said. Unless. Nico's realization was concurrent with hers. He looked at Denise. "What are the odds that the meteor didn't just unleash one shark?" "We haven't been able to explore yet, but considering the size and the ferocity, Not to mention the other specimens Cameron and I discovered. It's not out of the realm of possibility that more sharks, or species, have been driven out of the deep. Now, they were all watching the infinite world of water below them. Species? Rennie said. Like what? Chapter 39. Captain Samuel Grade gazed at the enormous carcass. The Megalodon's tail was secured by a huge cable meant for pulling ships 6 times its size and weight. It took a bit of persuading to get the divers down there to attach the cable, but the task was ultimately done, and now they had the body. The fish was dead. Really dead. The Bushmaster really tore the damn thing to shreds. It had lost so much blood, Grade suspected that it had lost 30% of its weight. Roughly the same as I've lost in sweat. 3 other cutters were on the way, one of which was carrying the commander from Mayport. Grade wasn't looking forward to that meeting. His inevitable demotion drew closer along with the commander. It bruised his ego much as it did his career. 59 feet, one of the crew said. That's the length. It's smaller than what they said it was, Grade said. 80 feet, my ass. Focusing on the failures of others was all he could do to make himself feel better. It had limited effect. Considering how his name was about to be dragged through the mud, he was starting to fantasize throwing himself into the shark's mouth. Already he was thinking of his many defenses. Unprecedented situation was the best he could come up with. It was true, but maybe not enough. Sir, this is the bridge. We've got multiple readings. Large bogies at 375 port side moving towards us. Massive objects. We've got one surfacing. Several bright spotlights beamed at the water. Grade lifted his binoculars to his eyes. His heart began another brutal drumbeat. It was a dorsal fin, at least as large as the one they had. Another Megalodon? Sir, a crew member said. Confirmed sighting. Yes, I see it. No, sir, over here, 100 yards off the starboard quarter. That got Grade's attention. Sure enough, there was another dorsal fin cutting through the water. What in the name of... The captain rushed into the bridge and stood over the sonar operator's shoulder. Oh my God. There were at least 7 blips moving near the vessel, all of them representing sharks between 60 and 80 feet. They were circling the boat, likely interested in the blood that was spilled by their brethren. It's moving away, a crewman announced through the comm. The captain watched through the window. The spotlight followed the shark on the port side as it retreated west. The other one's moving too. Maybe they realized what we did to their pal. Sir, I've got another reading. A big reading. They're all big, Grade said. No, this is really big, sir. Grade returned to the screen. Oh. It was over twice as large as the shark they killed. Unlike the other blips, it was coming straight for the vessel. The Megalodons were all retreating, some to the west, others to the north. The way they moved made Grade think of the one they killed, how it abruptly retreated southwest, seemingly out of nowhere. It's closing in, the operator said. 300 meters, 200 meters, 100, 50. Captain Grade returned to the deck just in time to see the ocean churn. He expected to feel the vibration of impact. None came, however. But the water was still writhing, as though angry that the Coast Guard had destroyed one of its deep-sea demons. And in revenge, it sent another. The crew broke into panic as the visitor revealed its true identity. Instead of teeth and fins, it was armed with tentacles, each lined with suction cups as wide as a car hood. Protruding from those suction cups were 3-foot hooks like eagle talons. Like cobras, they danced around the ship, taunting it before inflicting their awful wrath. Captain Grade stood frozen. All of a sudden, he longed heavily for his previous predicament. Being court-martialed was better than being eaten by a monstrous squid. His drill instructor's voice echoed in his mind. Sucks to be you. This concludes Megalodon by Michael Cole. Narrated by Joshua Saxon. Copyright 2021 by Michael Cole. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Severed Press and was produced in the year 2022 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books, which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit Tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.